A man stood in front of many spectators and listed the chemical elements. His face was as serious as possible, and his voice stern. Spreading his arms, he said that the power of his element called iron could only be studied at 57%. The crowd shuddered. The man grabbed a piece of iron in his hands and began to accumulate the energy the element of iron received. A predatory smile appeared on his face. The material in his hands began to mysteriously change, stretching like a scrap of some kind of matter. The crowd looked at him in surprise. The piece of ordinary iron began to take the most unusual forms. It moved. As if it were a living being, the man concentrated the power even more. In front of the man stood two more soldiers in military uniforms and holding something like a bill made also of iron. Something was about to happen. A second later, a piece of iron that looked more like a hedgehog flew into the shield, throwing one of the soldiers far away with its blast wave. Among this crowd, there was one boy who opened his eyes in surprise and looked at what was happening. His name was Gao Ning. Suddenly, Gao heard in his head some strange voice that whispered directly into his ear. Gao shivered and tried to pull himself together. The voice asked if he wanted to possess the great power. Looking in front of him in a serious voice, the guy told him to shut up. Only ranting knows how to. If he wants to, he can try to do. At the same second, a bright blue light shone before his eyes. Gao covered his face with his hands to avoid being blinded and bounced a little to the side. A notification cat appeared in front of him like in a computer game. The host had been selected open test order, started processing missions. The uncomprehending kid just stood in his seat and trembled with fear. He was a little scared of what was happening. He opened the system window in front of him, and a lot of characteristics appeared in front of him. And also, the portrait of the girl Gao. Didn't he understand what was wrong? Suddenly, a silhouette of a girl about his age appeared before his eyes. She was wearing a short skirt and something similar to a school uniform. Standing in the rest of the crowd, Gao did not dare to come closer, just watched what was happening. He saw these people for the first time and did not know who they were. The man who was apparently in charge introduced the girl and said that all the others would learn under her. And then Gao couldn't contain his surprise. The guy opened his mouth and gulped air like a fish thrown on the shore, but he still didn't understand anything. Meanwhile, the head soldier frowned and said that enough talk. The last thing he would say was that the others were the same age as her. The girl looked at all the other participants with serious eyes and did not utter a single word all this time. She had a serious and strict look like a teacher. Under the girl's feet was a piece of iron and some kind of liquid with a strange odor emanating from it. Her name was Shen. The girl lowered her eyes down and looked at the piece of iron without saying a word. It seemed she was a little anxious. The instructor ordered her to convert a piece of iron, but Shen said it wasn't necessary. Resources were already limited. She would use this one. Reaching out her hand to the piece of iron, the girl began to transform it. The ore was changing literally before her eyes. She was covered by a strange cocoon, as if a butterfly was going to hatch from there. Jen looked at it and concentrated her magic. After that, little Gao's surprised eyes opened even wider as he stood in the middle of the rest of the crowd and didn't know what to say. This looked really awesome. Shen transformed the piece of ore and it began to fly, as if a living creature was peering through the outline of a dragon. The girl even closed her eyes out of pleasure or concentration. A metal dragon began to fly beside her. Finally, with a wave of her hand, Shen launched the dragon straight into the air. Now the monster was clearly visible with burning red eyes. The metallic dragon flew over the crowd, and the other people looked up in surprise and opened their mouths, but didn't know what to say. Then Shen grabbed the battered door and launched it somewhere else in the distance. The girl did so easily, as if it were something she took for granted. The mangled door flew into the air, and the dragon opened its jaws and immediately grabbed it with its sharp teeth and shattered it. The people standing below began to see iron falling from the sky, and they bounced away, surprised and a little frightened, eyes filled with sheer delight. The dragon continued to circle around its mistress, and Shen guided it as if it were not a huge monster, but a tame kitten. While the others opened their mouths, Gao stood in a daze and bit his lips. This dragon was made of molten iron, but moved incredibly easily. The uniformed man coughed and praised Private Shen very well. She is really amazing in her abilities. Next, the man turned to the rest of the crowd. He expressed his hope that they would do well, and passed the entrance exam. A smile shone on the man's face. This was incredibly encouraging, and the other people took the initiative and started shouting that they would absolutely pass the exam. With a wave of his hand, the soldier said that this year they would accept a dozen students from the 3rd high school. He squinted his eyes, and a smile appeared on his face. Then our hero saw that in order to determine his ability level, he had to perform a sacrifice using his blood and fire. But the guy didn't expect this. His eyes filled with blood. They're kidding me. What kind of pagan pranks are these? Meanwhile, Shen, along with her dragon, continued to show off all her power. The girl didn't even pay attention to the crowd. After Gao saw what was required of him, his face became stony. If there was no other way, he would have to act, and it was starting to rain. Finally, wet drops began to fall on his head. Gao sighed heavily. Now he would be soaked to the skin. The guy was about to head for cover. It was Teacher Zhao. He stopped and froze in place, waiting to talk. A middle-aged man came up to him and put his arm around his shoulder, saying that there was a little business he could help him with. His eyes lit up at the sight of money. Realizing that he was going to get a hefty reward, Gao immediately agreed and clenched his fists and said that the teacher could rely on him and not worry. Then he took off from his seat and ran down the wet asphalt somewhere in the hull to finally stop getting wet in the rain. He bowed and thought to himself that there were not many such obedient boys left. Gao did not pay attention to the teacher. He was running in the rain and thinking about his own accomplishments. Among his peers, he was known as a good man, always ready to help, and was an excellent student, although he was from a poor family. In the first classes, he was something like a substitute teacher with a big stack of exam papers in front of him. The head teacher, a girl about his age, trembled and offered to continue the lesson they hadn't finished yesterday. It was obvious that she didn't want to write the exam. But even despite the entreaties, Gao was adamant. He said that today there would be an exam on the first lesson. It consists of 5 tasks. Another classmate with big shiny eyes asked that in the second lesson, Gao tell them something, and now so-and-so won't write the exam. And then Gao refused, saying that the others needed to study hard to pass the entrance exams because they would soon be graduating from high school. Eventually, the lesson ended, and the students were very upset that Gao was leaving them, but they still liked him, even though he was strict. Lastly, the guy said his phone was dead, showing his communicator, and asked the headman to keep an eye on things. The girl's eyes lit up again, and she said he could count on her. A fat guy stood next to her and wiped away her tears. Gao had successfully left school and was now walking in the rain to his home. The further away, the harder his path became. Suddenly he heard his mother's familiar voice, and that's not good if he gets caught skipping assignments. In front of him stood a middle-aged woman and smiled amiably. Her name was Shu. She was the protagonist's mother, a very kind woman. With a heavy sigh, she said he was an adult and could decide what he wanted to do, even though he was truant. This woman worked as some sort of cleaner, a dirty job, but she had no choice but to provide for her family. Gao smiled and said that he knew he could take care of himself, so don't let his mom worry. Passing by, his Aunt Gao said that he couldn't visit her yet, so some other time. Gao was a little downcast. The fame of his aunt that he was born in a forgotten land upset him a little, but the woman was right. Throwing the umbrella aside, the guy looked up into the sky. Even if he was born here, he should do his best to get out of here. But no sooner had the unfortunate man finished his thoughts than suddenly a notice came and frightened him very much before the sacrifice was to take place. Gao grimaced because of his companion's organizational skills, but there was no choice left. We'll have to make a sacrifice. Finally, he decided to go ahead and press the button with his finger and grimaced a little in surprise that something was about to happen. Better than spending his life in this forgotten land, Gao waved his hand and prepared to sacrifice, no matter how scared he was. A strange sphere appeared in front of him, and a voice suggested to choose the difficulty level. Gao stood in his place and didn't know what to do for now. In front of him appeared a lot of tables with figures and percentages, while the guy did not understand what it was all about and what he should choose. After thinking about it, Gao decided that he would certainly choose the highest level of difficulty, because there are more rewards, even though it is dangerous. It's just fine, especially for him. The guy's eyes lit up, and his hands reached for the difficulty selection. But he still decided to go for the highest level. If he wants to get out of here, it's worth the effort. Gao took a closer look. The probability of obtaining the first step is maximum, and the probability of obtaining special abilities is only half of nothing to be done. Grinning, the young hero made the decision to carry out the first mission. Stop thinking, and enough is enough. He decided to give him a clue: the same girl, Shen, who he saw. All her childhood spent in the sewers, she is an unrecognized genius for the capture of the reward is solid. Hearing the rustling of rats, Gao smiled. He didn't expect a genius like this girl to be afraid of ordinary rats. A smile appeared on the face of one rat. Surely it will be little. How much should he even catch? A dozen, 100, or more? Immersed in these thoughts, Gao literally lit up with anticipation and began to arouse the suspicions of passers-by. In the end, he decided he needed to catch the biggest mouse in this forgotten land, and that's the only way he could succeed. Meanwhile, Shen was practicing in her complex. The girl was throwing punches, one after another. Training did not stop for a second. She finished practicing as suddenly Lieutenant Chin, the man, appeared in the doorway and came in with a report. He brought some letters that were sent by the loving fans, Shen. The man handed her a stack and asked what to do with it all. Well, the girl threw away the stack of letters. Chin said she was cruel. The whole room was littered with love notes, and he didn't know what to do with them. But the major didn't want to hear anything she ordered to find someone to handle it all. Chin saluted and said he would do everything. But still, there was one letter the major should look at. The man slid the envelope closer and accented it. The lieutenant said that the one who sent the letter is the son of a local influential man. His name is Ju, and he is now waiting under the door. The major asked what he meant. The lieutenant insisted that Shen meet with him because influential connections would help them eventually gain respect in this place. But the girl, without saying a word, just snapped her fingers and threw some strange object into the lieutenant's hands. The man caught it at the last moment. It was a capsule or a shell casing of some kind, but the fact that it was made of metal was obvious. Asked what it was, the major said it was information about the status of forces in the Forgotten Land. Let the lieutenant take a good look. The man shuddered. The frightened lieutenant immediately rushed to the exit, apologizing for interrupting. He would immediately review whatever was written there. Left in her room, Shen became furious the lieutenant had actually suggested her major's use of seduction techniques as humiliating. Unable to cope with her anger, the girl hit the punching bag with such force that it barely stood its ground. This allowed her to calm down. Shen smiled and touched herself by her hair. Okay, we need to calm down and think about her immediate plans. Looking at herself in the mirror, the girl rejoiced how beautiful and gorgeous she admired herself every day without missing a single one. In the meantime, there were two guys who were waiting for Shen without success, and among them was that suitor Tan, who was standing with a bouquet. Even though no one had come out to him, he hadn't given up hope and had been waiting for the girl for hours. Next to him, his comrade Tan pulled some kind of device out of his pocket and said that he should only give it to him and he could enter the University of the capital. Putting the bouquet forward, he exclaimed happily that now he just needed to get to Shen's room and present her with a gift, and she would definitely melt with love. Suddenly, the two guys saw some stranger with a big briefcase behind his back and were startled out of their wits to see who it was rubbing there at all. It's not hard to guess that it was Gao, but what he forgot here, the guy was walking and as if not paying attention to these two. He walked past the two guys without even looking at them as if they weren't even there, which really offended them. Tang still couldn't stand it. He called out to Gao, who in turn stopped and looked at his old acquaintance in surprise at what he was doing here. After that, Gao apologized. His comrade was so unremarkable that it was hard to notice him at all. It was a heart punch, simply unbearable. After swallowing this insult, Thane coughed and said that there was a lucrative business that could make good money. Of course, this could not help but interest Gao, who was now exceptionally in need of money and would take any job. Tang saw his acquaintance's interest and told him to finally calm down, or nothing will happen. Gao could not keep himself in control. Approaching the acquaintance, Tang said that you need to forget the key to this hotel, and he pays 50,000, Gao doubted, and if he is caught, he will be imprisoned. When he heard the price of 100,000 doubts immediately disappeared, they shook hands, and Gao immediately agreed. The guy held out his hand. Thane didn't quite know what he was talking about or what they wanted from him, but his hand stayed where it was. Still receiving his payment in advance, Gao thanked his hapless comrade and promised that he would do exactly as requested. After he had received the payment, Gao sprinted towards the hotel and had the difficult task of retrieving the key to the secured area. Immediately, his comrade jumped up to Tan and like a dog started asking to pay him, and he said he could do much better. After that, Tan got angry and gave his friend a good smack. He at least understands why they won't go there themselves. The thing is, if they get spotted outside the hotel, it's all that fool Gao's fault. They'll be left with nothing, that's all. In the meantime, the guy had already gotten into the hotel and was standing at the reception desk asking if there were any rooms with hourly rates. But unfortunately, everything was taken. The hotel worker looked at him with a thoughtful look and began to search her mind if they had anything like that at all. But seeing the face of a beautiful boy in front of her that literally glowed with benevolence, woman melted and could not resist. She nodded her head. Sure they do. They have rooms with an hourly rate, and no girl could resist such a handsome man. Eventually, the right room was obtained. The hotel employee asked, how many seats should be in the room? The guy said only one, hearing that this visitor needs to meet Lieutenant Chin. The hotel worker frowned. Why even meet a man in a hotel? But it was a cunning plan. Gao knew that no one could know he was going to sacrifice Shen, or it would all go wrong. After choosing the right room, the woman said the lieutenant was on the 7th floor, and Gao's room would be next door. So don't worry. Winking as kindly as possible at the woman, Gao thanked her and said she was the best and headed back. Meanwhile, the girl behind the counter just blossomed. She has never seen such a handsome man. The more they look, the more they like him. Meanwhile, Gao, he paid 40,000 for the room. If he had known it was so expensive, he would have just stolen that poor key. Gao came to his room as if nothing had happened and went to the bathroom, all the advance money spent. At least his conscience does not torment him. In the end, he cheated his customer. Coming to the room to see the beautiful Shen, this fool will end up in the lieutenant's room, and he paid so much money for himself. The guy realized that obviously they wanted to use him, but since he had taken the money he had also done wrong, his conscience was starting to bother him a little. Meanwhile, Tan had been standing outside for an hour, and freezing cold they had already lost all hope. The unsuccessful suitor lamented that Gao had cheated him so shamelessly he would not let it go, and would definitely get even for the humiliation. Turning to his companion, or rather servant, Thane barked for him to go and bring him the unfortunate key at last. A friend came up to him and snuggled up to him, and if he stole it, Tan would definitely pay him back or not. Money was more important. Looking at his friend, he asked, "Is he as handsome as Gao? If not, then let him not even ask." The unhappy, offended friend didn't even understand the point of the question. Another offensive question followed, or is he as smart as Gao is able to get out of any situation dry? But he wasn't short on brains either, so he got a kick in the ass and orders to go and get him the key, and if he didn't, he was finished. 10 minutes later, the key to the right room had been obtained, and the friend smiled and waited for some gratitude, but in vain. Still taking pity on his servant, Tan praised him and said that tomorrow he would buy him new clothes. The happy boy nodded his head and began to bow. Not paying attention to anything around him, Tan said that today was the most important day of his life and began to comb his hair and makeup in front of himself. In front of his eyes constantly stood Major Shen. He fell in love with her at first sight and could no longer think of anyone else. And so the lover was already standing by her door, or so he thought, and preparing to open number 808 in his hands, he had a bouquet of flowers. He exhaled and prepared himself for this moment. His whole life hung in the balance. He had been preparing for so long, he just couldn't fail. The guy swiped the card on the lock, and there was a click and a beep, indicating that the door was open. As soon as he opened the door, he felt moisture in the air. So she's in the shower. Thane came to delight. He shuddered for a moment and left It felt like his heart was about to burst out of his chest, and he was ready to cry. It was the most important day of his life. His lover was in the bathroom. Thane froze and slumped against the wall, clutching the bouquet in his hands. He breathed heavily and prepared himself. Looking at the man wrapped in a robe, the guy admired the perfectly shaped figure. He didn't even realize that he had been deceived a long time ago. He combed his hair and tucked it back. Fools don't understand how to fall in love with a woman at first sight. Thane was an experienced Casanova and knew how to flatter. He considered himself an expert in lovemaking and thought he knew absolutely everything. He knocked on the door. The man in the bathroom kept wiping his head and getting ready, unsuspecting that a lovesick madman was already waiting for him outside. With the idea that love is always crazy strong, the guy stormed into the shower stall and tried to grab his lover by the robe. He did manage to rip the robe off the unfortunate man, and the guy immediately shouted, "I love you," and thrust the bouquet forward. Love completely overshadowed his sanity, and he screamed that he loved her more than life, without even realizing who was standing in front of him. Inside himself, Tan already realized that she should scream now from surprise and fear, but he prepared a speech to calm the girl down. A second or two and 3 seconds passed, but nothing happened. Tan opened his eyes, trying to understand what had happened and why there was no effect. But instead of a beautiful girl in front of him, stood a muscular, naked man with only a towel on his head. Opening his eyes, the unhappy lover saw something that shattered all his fantasies and traumatized him for life. He shouldn't have seen it. There was a pause between them that lasted for an interminable few seconds. Tan had already hidden the bouquet behind his back and realized the situation he was in. Inside, everything continued to boil. Thane realized that his most important moment in life had been disturbed. He had been cheated, and now everything was going to come to an end. A familiar male voice was heard, and at the last second, Tan felt a man's foot slamming into his face at great speed. The guy was hit so hard that he flew backwards, throwing blood spatter from his broken nose. While on the first floor, police and hotel security heard something going on upstairs and immediately rushed there. The unhappy kid realized that Lieutenant Chin was standing in front of him and tried to explain everything, but the man covered himself with a towel and tried to pull him away. It was all useless. Tan literally stuck to him and tried to explain everything, but the lieutenant just wanted to get dressed and get away from this madman. Several policemen suddenly rumbled into the room and tried to squeeze through the narrow door. Before the eyes of the men appeared, a very strange picture of an almost naked lieutenant trying to unhook some boy from himself. For a second, there was silence. Seeing such an unexpected picture, the policemen were stunned from their lieutenant and immediate superior. They certainly did not expect such a thing. It would be very difficult indeed to explain. It would be very difficult for the lieutenant, together with the unhappy lover, to look at the policeman. Naturally, the policemen took it all in their own way. It seems the lieutenant has a little lover, shame on them, and closed the door immediately. A moment ago in his room, Gao heard some kind of commotion going on upstairs. He didn't understand why it was the lieutenant who went upstairs as it happened. He jumped to the door and looked through the crack to see what was going on upstairs. The first thing he saw was Shen, who somehow ended up here. What was she even doing here? The girl was in her usual clothes. Leaning his back against the door, Gao began to ponder if Tianshun really lives on the 8th floor. Then she lives in room 708. After a second, an idea was born in my head. No matter what happened a floor above, this opportunity can't be released. We need to make a sacrifice. After all, after about 10 minutes, Gao was already throwing his backpack into the right room, and it could be considered that he had done what was necessary. It turned out to be so simple. Seeing the girl's personal belongings, Gao shuddered in surprise. He was definitely not mistaken. This is her room. There can be no mistake. Turning his head sideways, Gao saw on the coffee table a strange pill he had seen earlier in training. This was the thing Shen was taking when she demonstrated her skills as a high-level energy saver. Seeing such an expensive thing, Gao from the last strength tried to keep himself calm and act reasonably. Guy slipped the pill into his pocket. The most important thing now was to find a safe place to hide, and he began fumbling around trying to find an opening. At some point, the guy heard some hurried footsteps in the corridor case. Bad girl coming back, need to find some place quicker. Nothing better came to mind than just going into the closet with Gao's clothes, would have to squeeze in there still, and take his huge backpack with him. Eventually, after a few seconds, the room emptied, and the doors opened on the threshold. Stood the unsuspecting Shen, only her shadow could be seen. Meanwhile, hiding in the closet, Gao tried not to give himself away. He thought he had left no trace outside, or wanted to believe it. The guy leaned against the door, hearing the sound of water. He prayed that after the shower, the girl would go to bed. Just let her go to bed. Shen finished taking her bath, and came out wrapped in only one towel with some sort of mask on her face. Zhao noticed to his horror that she was heading straight for the clothes locker. You shouldn't joke like that. If things go on like this, he'll be exposed for sure. She opened the closet door and started fumbling through the pile of clothes, but she couldn't see anything because of the cucumbers in her eyes. The girl reached out her hand just where Gao was sitting and hiding, and then, who knows what would happen. Covering his mouth with his hands, he began to swear to himself and begged that this wouldn't happen before the girl's hand was only a few centimeters away from him. But suddenly she stopped, and fixing one of the cucumbers on her face, she thought about something and examined the whole cabinet with her eyes. Finally, she found the right dress. It was some kind of nightgown. Shen grabbed it and immediately ran back. Poor Gao, for those few seconds, almost went to the grave from fear, but luckily, he was not noticed. He began to go through the girl's things and raised an eyebrow in surprise at the rabbit-eared clothes. It was unexpected that Shen was wearing something like that. Meanwhile, Major just laid back on the bed and smiled. Her face flushed with heat. She was just enjoying herself. After all, she's just an ordinary girl. No better, no worse. And why does everyone think she's so special? A large drop of water fell on the forehead of the unsuspecting girl, who seemed to be asleep, her eyelids only occasionally twitching. A little girl of about 10 years of age was sitting in some kind of kennel that looked more like a sewage pit, shivering with cold and fear at the same time. The girl began to crawl backwards, her face filled with horror, as the huge rats the size of small kittens moved towards her. She screamed at them not to come any closer, tears streaming down her cheeks, but there was nothing she could do. Eventually, it turned out that it was only a nightmare. Shen stood up on her bed and looked around fearfully. It was only a dream. The girl looked extremely exhausted. This nightmare had made her wake up so suddenly, it had tormented her for years on end. Suddenly, the sounds of falling drops came to her ears. Just like in that dream, the girl tensed her whole body and began to look into the room. There was that nauseating smell from the sewer. It seemed that the dream was beginning to come true. Looking around, Shen tensed up even more. She was grasping the phone receiver to call for help, but her body froze, unable to move. With a terrible effort of will, she picked up the phone and started screaming, trying to call for someone. The nightmare had taken over her body. Suddenly, there was a mouse squeak that gave her goosebumps, and she realized she was trapped in her own room. Huge hordes of rats moved straight towards her. Seeing in the unfortunate girl only their prey, Major sat on the bed and just shivered. Finally spotting the hated animals, she hid under her pink blanket, hoping it would at least protect her. The rats were approaching. One of them was suspiciously large, and the squeak was becoming more and more distinct. The predator had already smelled its prey. Several hundred rats pounced on the girl hiding under the blanket and began to crawl over her body, exploring every inch of her body. All the girl's courage evaporated like steam. She just lay under the blanket and tried to hide, but it was all to no avail. Finally, she couldn't stand it anymore and waved her arms in an attempt to drive the hated monsters away. The rats scattered apart like confetti, and the blanket went up in the air. All this time, the unhappy Shen tried to convince herself that it was just a dream, but the rats were incredibly real. The girl was trembling all over her body. Unable to fight any longer, she jumped up from her bunk and rushed anywhere to hide from the omnipresent monsters, but it was all useless. For a moment, the girl froze in place and only stared, wide open eyes before her. She saw something horrible creature from nightmares. An impossibly large rat, the size of a human, stood right in front of her. The most terrifying incarnation of dreams appeared in reality. Scared out of her wits, Shen waved her arms and shouted for the rat to stay away from her, but it was all to no avail. At some point, after a brief pause, the huge rat lunged straight at the defenseless girl, spreading its wide paws in an attempt to catch her. Gathering all her willpower, the frightened girl gave a strong blow, and the rat shrieked in surprise. Determined to defend herself at all costs, Shen threw a monstrous punch at the monster from her childhood nightmares, and her fist burned from the overabundance of energy. But by some miracle, the monstrous rat still survived and rose to its feet, shaking off the debris that had once been the closet. The monster opened its monstrous mouth and let out a piercing squeak that the whole neighborhood could hear. Now the girl was really numb. She realized that the rat is not so easy to defeat. The monster was approaching step by step, leaving her no choice. In the end, the fear became so strong that the poor girl simply fainted. Her eyes rolled back, and her body collapsed to the ground. For a few seconds, there was a pause. The huge rat did not dare to approach its victim. Although it was completely defenseless, Shen was lying on the hard floor. Suddenly, the monster leaned over to the girl and spoke in a human voice. Because of the tight suit, it was unclear who was sitting in it. It turned out that it was just a clever trick to scare the man dressed as a rat, with his finger touched the unconscious girl trying to push her up somehow. Suddenly, the wool suit unzipped, and from there emerged the body of the man who had been hiding inside all this time, trying to scare the girl. It turned out that it was Gao. The guy still realized his plan and frightened his victim, but in return, he received a strong blow in the chest that was very painful. But now it was possible to begin the ritual of sacrifice. The girl lay unconscious, and everything should go smoothly. Meanwhile, in the street, a poor lover who had been beaten up was swearing and saying that he would remind the lieutenant of his deed. He had almost lost his life. Meanwhile, his fearful friend was always muttering something under his nose, afraid that someone would find out about their prank and they would get in trouble. Eventually, Tan couldn't stand it anymore and grabbed him by the scruff of the neck. What else is he afraid of? The worst could have already happened. He needed revenge. Offended to the core, the guy said that they can't just walk away. They have to show what they're worth if they just walk away. They admit defeat. And besides, this Thane had a very powerful father, so the lieutenant will pay dearly for this humiliation. His friend was horrified. Could the lieutenant have decided to interfere in these lands? This news shook him to the core. It turns out that the social order in this place collapsed long ago, and the three great powers are the true emperors of the Forgotten Lands. With a thumbs up, the deputy's son said that if the Alliance wanted to take control of the Forgotten Lands, then they should choose one of the three great holders. A sinister smile appeared. Tan was obviously up to something and didn't plan to back down. He would avenge this humiliation and do his best. He said that there's nothing to choose from, so it's too early to worry. The guy squeezed and prepared, and that this girl from the army, no matter how brilliant she was, still in front of money no one can resist. And besides, his father is very influential. Tan licked his lips, and the army will still support him. So don't worry, and this girl will only belong to him. His suck-up friend immediately leaned against his comrade and asked if he would take him with him, but it was up to him. In his hands flashed some kind of flask, probably with sleeping pills or some other potion. Shen should be asleep by now, so everything will work out. It was a forbidden substance. Thane was going to let it through the ventilation to affect the psyche of his victim. A smile appeared on the guy's face. Meanwhile, Gao sat in Shen's room and watched the girl just lying on the floor unconscious. Guy did not know what to do in such a situation. Looking at his recorder, he shuddered. The sound effects that had been recorded in the sewers were too authentic. It was already time for the sacrifice to begin. Gao could not dare to take the first step. After all, he had never done this before. The candles were lit in the room, and a magical circle was already drawn around the girl, for the ritual had to be perfect. Next came the pattern. With trembling hands, Gao began to trace the pattern on the girl's face, around the eyes, on the nose, and even lower, with red paint. In the end, everything was ready. The guy was happy as anything, and he is a genius in all directions, even in art. Look how interesting it turned out. There was only the last step to make a slogan suitable for the situation. The young artist thought about it and began to go through the options. "A last long," thought he shouted, urging the turbulent torrent of passing self-hot blood. These words sounded too loud in the empty room. A few seconds passed, but nothing happened. The girl lay on the floor unmoving, and something seemed to have gone wrong. Gao couldn't understand why there was no reward promised to him. What about the trust between people and all that? Suddenly, there was a system notification. Turns out the guy said the slogan, "Not loud enough. You need to redo even louder, but that way he'll be heard." Then the failed shaman exclaimed, "They must be mocking him. Who would even yell some nonsense in the middle of the night is suspicious." But there was no other way out. The guy sighed and took a full chest of air and prepared to shout. If he wanted to get the reward, he had to make sacrifices. His eyes lit up and his teeth clenched. 3 seconds of embarrassment, and already all that was left was to shout loud enough. But before he could even open his mouth, a strange odor hit his nose. Gao stopped and sniffed. The smell was too pungent, but it came from somewhere far away. Gao knew chemistry well and knew what it smelled like. It was a potent substance. The guy covered his nose with his hands so he wouldn't inhale it himself. Meanwhile, the offended lover, along with his ward, were prowling around the hotel. Tan ordered his friend to watch the door. The lad happily agreed. But suddenly the young delinquent froze in place, as if something didn't add up from what he saw. Tan fell into a slight stupor. In front of him lay none other than Gao. He was passed out and barely breathing, exactly not what Tan expected to see here. Hung a pause. The young burglar had already slapped his forehead and was upset that he had gotten the wrong door again, but his friend told him to look away. Indeed, if you moved your eyes a little higher, you could see Shen, who was lying in the middle of a strange magic circle, surrounded by candles. It remained to be seen why she was here with this guy. Only Thane's intermittent whispering broke the night's silence. Why are these two here? Eventually, a way out of the situation presented itself. Tang looked at Gao and shouted that he was the one who had done this to her, and why was Shen in the room? Trying to put his head together, Gao felt that he couldn't move after all. The substance was too strong, and he was literally paralyzed. But Thane was triumphant. It worked just as he planned, and even better. Now he'll get even for being tricked. Leaning over to the unfortunate paralyzed man, Tang whispered that it seemed all the blame would fall on Gao, as luck would have it. And he, in turn, will be the hero who rescued Shen from the clutches of an intruder, all going too well. The situation was critical, and Gao breathed a full chest of air. He had already made up his mind. If he was going to get caught, he should at least do it right. He shouted his spell so loud that it seemed like the whole hotel woke up at the same second. Eventually, the force left the young necromancer, and he collapsed on the floor next to the girl, who was already unconscious, and there was silence again. The uncomprehending Tang, along with his sidekick, looked amongst themselves, and why this kid suddenly shouted those strange words. But then a terrifying thought came into his head. If he screamed again, all the guards would come running, and then they would not get away with it. And then he ordered his friend C to hold him, and not let him open his mouth, or else the irreparable will happen. Two guys were practically hysterical. The two of them were holding Gao so that he wouldn't get up from his seat. But the guy realized that it would be impossible for him to move a finger. His concern now was why nothing is changing where his promised reward is some stupid trick again. It's the system. Suddenly there was a click, and a bright light spilled across the room. It was a notification the host had successfully verified. Now there was a plate with Gao's initials, his age, and a photo. It was a passport of sorts. Well, better this than nothing. The guy immediately became frustrated again. His appearance was perfect. Blood value was normal. Blood strength was normal, but the hidden talent was low. But why was that so? Turns out he wasn't talented at all. His characteristics turned out to be the most mediocre below everyone else. But suddenly a voice was heard. Gao looked up and was told that he would be baptized with the highest ability and also had a chance to get the secret chest. Eyes lit up at the word strongest in front of the guy as far as how much he could get. It remained only to take possession of this secret object after the sacrifice of the girl to the word and lay in a blackout. There was a renewal of hidden talents. Drone tensed, and a bright bluish light continued to spill everywhere. Something had definitely changed. At some point, the guy noticed that his hidden talent was increasing significantly. His growth was so strong that the numbers didn't even have time to transpire. Eventually, the upgrade was completed. Gao felt as if he was weightless. He was in some strange virtual reality. Seeing that he had started some kind of evolution, Gao didn't even quite understand what it was about. Perhaps he needed to complete the quest for the evolution to reach its finale. Even apart from that, Gao obtained a secret chest. The guy's eyes went wide after seeing his equipment. Quickly coming to his senses, Gao said, "They can take this set to you." He never looked for easy ways, so all do it on your own. The two guys holding him looked at Gao with surprised eyes, wondering what he was muttering to himself. Suddenly, Shen, who had been in a blackout until then, began to move. Could it be that, at the most inopportune moment, she decided to wake up? Gao's back began to run with goosebumps. No choice gymnast, so gymnast, let it be, so he tensed his whole body. Trying to escape from the clutches of these two, Gao crawled forward. Be what it may, there was no choice. Tang and Shi tried to hold him, but it was all useless. After receiving his hidden talent, Gao began to flail his arms as if he was a bird. The two guys holding him bounced to the sides. They received powerful slaps and held their faces. Yes, what's wrong with this guy, thought each of them. It felt like Gao was doing morning calisthenics. But if that's what's going to help him in this situation, there's no choice. Seeing that his characteristics were increasing every second, Gao was glad that if it was true, then the ability was not so useless. Coming to his senses, Tang lunged straight at his opponent, swinging his fists around. If his friend was so useless, he could handle it himself. But suddenly, Gao threw it away with just one sharp movement of his hand. So strong was he that a pop was heard. At some point, the assailant realized what was wrong with this guy. It's simple. All right, there's going to be another moment, and they're going to show him what he's worth. A small knife that Tan kept stashed in his pocket for emergencies appeared in his hands as the blade of a dagger gleamed. Suddenly, all three guys froze in place. There was a knock and some footsteps. Someone was heading into this room. The man standing on the other side of the door started screaming and trying to wake up the major, but as we know, the girl was out. Eventually, Tan realized the situation they were in, and if they were spotted, the guys would go straight to hell. The lock clicked, and the door was about to swing open, and the two boys looked around fearfully, wondering where to hide. To his surprise, Gao was already standing on the windowsill and preparing to jump out of the window. Behind his back, he had some kind of rope tied a few floors above. Lastly, Gao smiled and winked at the two, saying that it was too hard, so they should take the blame. Let them try already. And only now, Tan began to realize what had happened to him. He had just been tricked. He saw the capsule that was in Shen's hands. Throwing away the parting gift, Gao jumped out of the window and grabbed his rope, wishing the two boys good luck as he said goodbye. Meanwhile, the capsule had fallen to the parquet and was disintegrating, and some powder was pouring out, spreading across the floor. From there, a dragon began to emerge, the monster's features appearing stronger and stronger. The dragon opened its mouth, and a bright light fell from there. Eventually, a huge serpent had already filled the entire room. He appeared literally out of nowhere and started breathing flames, looking at his victims. Eventually, the lieutenant succeeded in breaking down the door and was now standing on the threshold with his fellow soldiers. The experienced military man froze in place at the sight of what was happening in the major's room. The man saw the dragon. His teeth instinctively clenched. Worse, he saw the same Thane again, who had barged into his shower stall, ripped off his clothes, and professed his love. And now, here he was. The man shifted his eyes to the side and saw Shen's lifeless body, which was covered with incomprehensible symbols and lying in the center of the circle. In addition, the perpetrator had a knife in his hands, and it was already an assault, and an armed one. Tan waved his hands in an attempt to justify himself, but all this was useless. The lieutenant became furious and swung his fist straight at the boy's face. The impact was so strong that the unfortunate man flew a few meters away and crashed into the wall at a tremendous speed, cracking the concrete. There was no need to explain anything. Lieutenant Chin went into a rage. He was like a rabid buffalo and ready to destroy this petty, here and now. Hearing the smell of poison in the air, the man grabbed the boy by the scruff of the neck and prepared to teach him a lesson as he dared. They had all the evidence in their hands. The man was screaming that he would bury this guy alive for what he had done this evening. But suddenly something changed. The two froze in place. Before the lieutenant could bring his fist down on the boy's face, a strong wind picked up around them, and they all forgot about the dragon. Meanwhile, the huge flying monster is already targeting his victims. Today, he's going to have a solid lunch, and he's going to have 2 whole men for dinner. Eventually, Major Shen came to her senses. The girl was furious that several men were doing in her room. She craved answers. But it seems that the unfortunate one was not quite out of her mind. She had not quite recovered from her fright with the rat, and thought they were still in her room. The lieutenant saw that the girl had finally come to her senses and tried to explain the man was extremely scared and didn't know what to do. Realizing that the situation was critical, the man shouted for everyone to run out of here immediately and waved his hand towards the exit, leaving them little time to escape. Major Shen was so scared that she didn't realize what was going on around her. She launched her huge dragon straight forward. The lieutenant bounced to the side in an attempt to get out of the line of attack. He realized it was useless to talk to the girl in such a state. In all the turmoil and chaos, Thane tried to say something to the girl, saying he had something important for her, if only she would let him live. But this request was not destined to come true. In a second, the poor man was already lying unconscious. His mouth was foaming, and he did not understand why it had happened like this. The room was in chaos, with smoke coming out of the room, and everything was happening too fast. Thank God, most of the people survived, but there was no time to lose. The lieutenant, along with his charges, ran towards the exit. The building was collapsing. The hotel was about to turn into ruins. As the man ran, he recalled everything he had seen. Shen's power was so destructive that even experienced masters could not resist it. Meanwhile, Gao was climbing down his rope. The guy felt the building start to walk like a house of cards. Something was definitely wrong. Holding tightly to his rope, the boy pondered. He had no idea the dragon was so strong. In the market, it would be worth a lot. Having applied a safe landing, Gao descended to the ground without much trouble. After all, the skills of a gymnast were useful here. Suddenly, a metal storage device fell on his head. The guy immediately looked at it and started thinking, what is this thing for? I wondered only one thing, if some things like this in any case need to be collected first and then think. In the hotel, a fire was already breaking out of the window. Gao had already done everything he needed to do and only waved goodbye. His plan was to... Gao was about to go home when he suddenly remembered something. He needed to finish one more thing to make everything go smoothly. He went to the reception desk. There was a girl talking on the phone with the lieutenant. This event shocked the whole hotel. Everyone stood on their ears. Gao walked up to the front desk and said in a polite voice that he was moving out. The girl didn't even turn around and just said to leave the key. The guy got a chance to escape without any more questions, and with a smile on his face, he was already running down the street to his house. All the way home, he wondered if those two guys would remember him. Yes, and Shen probably remembered his face. It would be bad if he was recognized. But Gao tried to reassure himself in any case, there are risks. It is better to make sure and the way out will always be found, and besides, he is quite smart. In a few minutes, the guy was already standing in some alleyway and had managed to get far enough away that no one could attack his trail. Speaking of which, there was one more unopened chest, and Gao decided to immediately seize the opportunity. He opened the interface and started searching for treasures. The chest opened and shone brightly. The treasure it held must have been very valuable, or at least useful. In the boy's hand appeared a small blue-colored pill that looked like a glass ball. It was a magic potion. A look of delight appeared on Gao's face as he looked at the treasure with uninterrupted eyes. One of the properties was that this potion randomly renews the life and variable powers of the wearer. A small pill glistened in his fingers. The whole point is that the latent natural ability is very strong, and the physical capabilities of life force and variable energy are like mana and health. Gao smiled. Now he would be able to hide his power, and with only his hands to control it, this medicine would help him in times of need. It was late evening, and it was time to go home. Gao opened the door of his house and slipped inside, trying not to wake anyone. Inside, it was just like always, the usual home environment, and the mother was asleep at the table. She probably came home late. Despite Gao's best efforts not to wake her, the woman woke up and, wiping her eyes, greeted her son. She's still in a half-sleep, 2 plates with some food, and said that Auntie gave them 2 eggs and meat, so let the son eat. There was a hot flight, a piece of meat and some scrambled eggs, a modest dinner, but it was better than nothing. They didn't have much money. Mother asked Gao didn't cough from the smoke, but the guy said it's fine. The smell is very tasty, so you can hardly smell the smoke. Looking at his mother, Gao said that the entrance exam was only a few days away, and he wanted to enter the Central Military University. Eating the rice, Gao said it only needs 1,000 for the entrance fee, so don't let Mom worry, he'll find a way to get the money. Eventually, he finished everything and said the meat was very tasty and asked his mom if she had tried. The woman said yes. Of course, the son realized that his mother was unlikely to taste the meat and wanted to give her a treat. He stretched forward, holding the meat with his chopsticks. Eventually, the woman smiled and reached for her chopsticks. She agreed. After all, her son was very caring and kind. Looking at his mother, Gao said that when he entered the military university will move to the center and eat meat every day. The woman agreed. All this time, Shu replied somehow aloof. She finally got up and said that she was already sleepy. so she will go to sleep and let her son lie down. Gao thought about the one piece of meat his mother had left for him, but he felt sorry for her. When the mother already hid somewhere in her room, the guy stayed in the kitchen and said to himself that his mother did not worry, he was able to support the family. From somewhere, that annoying drone appeared. He said that a master had appeared who was possessed by Jinju. It was unclear what it was. But from somewhere appeared a window with a quest, received a new task. Male responsibility. Gao did not even have time to understand anything and just shrieked. Looking at the notification panel in front of him, Gao moved some slider to the side. His gaze was very wary and serious. Looking in front of him, the boy read the text. He must have hot blood. His eagerness would not be enough to prove he was a real man. Seeing the task in front of him, the guy shuddered a little. He had to accumulate 100,000 points in 3 days, and the task was insurmountable. But in his mind, Gao already dreamed how he would be swimming in money, and his family would never again know what need or hunger was. Everything around him began to change again. He found himself as if in some kind of capsule. In his head, the logical thought came to him that the bank should be robbed or something. The virtual assistant gave him hints. All the while, the guy stood in his place and listened to the information was quite valuable. Showing his middle finger to the system, Gao said that this was nonsense and was not going to listen to what he was being told. Even with all the warnings, the guy said he wouldn't be confused and everything would be fine, so don't even think about writing you off. To begin with, he decided to choose the normal difficulty to at least try his hand at it. He pressed his finger on the notification icon and continued the quest. Under such circumstances, there is a good prospect of getting trapped, but he had little choice. Gao smiled and slanted his eyes. He sat at his computer surrounded by a multitude of tabs, a great opportunity to make some money. Looking at the strange flash drive, he wondered how the device that turned out to be found would give him a clue if there was a bee inside it. Eventually realizing that he would actually have to rob a bank, the unfortunate one grabbed his head. How is this even possible? Is this even real? Only now, Gao realized that the second clue was the key, and he was tempted to choose a high difficulty and made a mistake. In my head, I immediately pictured him in a helmet crawling on the ground and trying not to give himself away. In which case, he's definitely dead, but what to do? He took the flash drive with 2 fingers and shoved it into the data reader, and there was a click and a small squeak. Looking at the multitude of icons in front of him, Gao saw only one folder, but it was double encrypted. Probably it had the information he needed. Everything he saw looked like local chart and profile structures. Could this really be a bank robbery? Looking closer, Gao realized that it was more like a factory that produced various machines and mechanisms, but it had an emblem on it. As soon as he saw the inscription magnetic pile, he was stunned that this was the open source of the disaster. How could something like this be left in the public domain? An image of a vast desert, surrounded only by mountains and some vague cubes of metal appeared in front of my face. A vague silhouette of a dragon and a girl who controlled it with only gestures appeared, and the dragon obediently flew wherever it was directed. The boy sat and thought for now that was all he knew, but now there was no access to more information. But why does the name Magnetic Pile appear here? And what kind of dream toy factory is this anyway? Gao took a closer look and studied the information. The more the guy looked at this information, the more interesting stopped. How still a lot of rumors about it even drooled. That's all he had so far, but robbing a bank was better than robbing this unknown place, because it looked pretty easy. As the future robber thought about it, he realized that the clue wished he had a hammer with him. Is this thing good for anything other than knocking people around? After drinking a few sips of fragrant tea, Gao thought about the wrench. Probably it is used for the same purpose, but in principle, it is understandable. And there should also be a shovel most likely to be able to hide the hapless people who will meet him on the way. In principle, everything is clear. It was too late to ponder. It was time for action. He popped the strange pill into his mouth and began to chew diligently. The strange substance was a pleasant minty flavor unexpectedly, of course. Gao expected it to taste nasty, but it turned out to be the opposite. Suddenly, the cold began to intensify to the point where it felt like his brain was going to freeze. The unfortunate guy fell to the ground and felt as if he was about to lose his life, his body freezing before his eyes. When Gao looked up, he saw that his vitals were far below normal. A couple more seconds, and he'd be on his way to the other side of the world. It finally became clear what this pill does. Gao thought about it and realized that you should only use this thing in extreme situations. It felt like he was losing blood. If this continues, he'll just pass out and there's no telling who will find him afterwards. The kid tried to stop it, but it was no use. His voice had weakened and was almost inaudible in his brain, as if everything had turned upside down. Gao felt incredible pain. He curled up in a fetal position and held onto his stomach. His vitals had dropped to almost zero. It was dangerous. But if he continues like this, he won't survive in the end. He has to make some movements to stay conscious. There was real horror on his face. The guy began to perform a movement similar to morning exercise, first raising his arm, though how hard it would be. He started counting to keep up the rhythm of his arms and legs, but he could still feel them, and that was something. He managed to overcome the first human limit his body moved, though with great difficulty the heat began to spread through it, and the blood was accelerating. Suddenly, Gao found himself in an unfamiliar place, but despite all this, he was comfortable and the warmth grew stronger. The feeling was as if he were wrapped in some woolen plaid. There was a bright light around him, and a pleasant warmth and a shiver ran through his body. Finally managed to come to his senses, Gao jerked for the last time and stood up. The guy was now sitting up and breathing heavily. Did it really manage to survive? Eventually, he felt a foul odor, as if he was covered in mud. Looking at his hand, the guy saw some gray mass. I had to take a shower. What was going on here? But thank God he was alive. At least, Gao got to his feet and quickly ran to the bathroom. The warm shower sobered him up in an instant as Gao stood under the water and thought it was getting much better. But it was unclear what it was. All this time, the feeling that Gao had become stronger, much stronger than he was before, never left, the guy thought for a moment. As soon as the newly minted warrior saw his characteristics, he rejoiced. He already had a completed foundation for an energy warrior. Rumor has it that a person who has broken through the boundaries of their body can become an energy warrior. You can even research the energy extraction skill. And if you do it twice, you can even get the ability to synthesize energy and purify energy, which is already much cooler. But if one can break the human barrier more than 2 times, then hard to imagine what one would be able to do. An image of Shen immediately appeared in his mind. Standing in the shower under the hot water, Gao was already so filled with enthusiasm that he was practically burnt out on the idea. All that was left was to make it a reality. The events moved to the room of the 3rd deputy of the high school, a man standing in just underpants and with a tassel in one hand from a glass of wine in the other. On her stomach, she was practically alone. Wife on her back was drawing a beautiful rose. The man stopped and took a closer look. He knocked over the glass and poured the alcohol directly on the naked woman. It was a real art. He was in ecstasy of such beauty. A drop of red wine fell on a red flower on the woman's back, and it was a peculiar but very mesmerizing sight. Suddenly the phone rang. The man picked up. It was Lieutenant Qin. The deputy asked what could have happened at 3 o'clock. After a few seconds, the deputy's face reddened in surprise at whether Ning-Er had attacked the major. The man became furious. The woman lying on the bed raised her head. She had pointed ears like an elf. She listened to the conversation and flapped her eyes. The deputy was so enraged that he swung his legs around and there was a thump. He knocked over a chair and was just furious. The deputy was muttering something to himself. Lieutenant could have been ashamed to ask for such a thing at night. It was unthinkable. The man was like a raging bull. A lighter clicked and a flame appeared from it. He lit the cigar and the room filled with acrid cigarette smoke. The female elf wrapped a towel around herself and sat down on the bed, asked, did something wrong happen to the man again? The deputy shouted that the sly fox, Qin, was not who she claimed to be. He needed to know everything about her and the old man who attacked her. The woman sat back down and raised an eyebrow in surprise, as if the alliance's goal was the Forgotten Lands. And about this man, it was settled. Pensive deputy said that the information has not yet been confirmed. Yes, he himself does not know anything about it. Intelligence is also quiet. Shook off the ashes, the elfess asked how on earth they could find a man who doesn't take quarrels out of the house. About him nothing is known about him at all. She leaned against the man and said that we could continue to create beautiful things together, but the deputy didn't seem to be in the mood for that. Turning her back to him, the pixie said that she loved his work. It was like no other. He was truly incredible. Eventually, the woman jumped out the open window, leaving behind only wobbly curtains. The deputy was left alone. In the end, the deputy grabbed the phone again. He knew what Qin wanted, but his son must be saved at all costs, even if he had to find a replacement. People gathered in a large conference room around an oblong table. Surprised and alarmed shouts were heard everywhere. The lieutenant sat holding today's report in his hands, the man's face growing more and more concerned with each passing second as the name on the paper appeared familiar to him. Looking at the others present, the lieutenant asked in a stern voice who had opened room 707. Sitting next to the others, a woman who was at the front desk of the hotel that night said in a frightened voice that it was her. The lieutenant looked at her and asked who this Gao was and how old he was. The woman replied that he was 18 and in his 3rd year of high school. Hearing that this kid wanted to meet him, the lieutenant was a little wary of what this punk wanted from him. Looked strange. The man turned to the officer standing next to him and ordered him to contact intelligence and find out all about this guy and bring him in by all means. Eventually, a few patrolmen found themselves in a strange place. The houses here had been destroyed as if a brutal battle had been fought without a single person in sight. The military looked at each other and asked if this was the kid's dwelling, which looked extremely depressing, but it was. The target of the stalking was somewhere far away at that moment. His mother was working several jobs to provide for them and returning late. The main thing is to finish this task as soon as possible. Gao looked at the notice plate and got ready. The task is difficult, but doable. The preparations were finished and it was time to go out. Holding a hammer and a wrench, the guy moved forward. As soon as the doors opened, the familiar figure of Teacher Gao appeared on the threshold. He stopped for a second and looked closely. He did not expect to encounter this man here. The teacher stood in front of him, shoved his hands in his pockets. Gao looked at him with surprised eyes and asked what he was doing here, but got no answer. It was obvious that the guy was very worried. Even his face turned gray. He was shaking and trying not to give himself away, but it was not working well. The teacher immediately noticed the huge backpack behind the guy's back and wondered what he was hiding there. He looked extremely suspicious. Ignoring this question with a smile on his face, Gao asked if the teacher was a little early. He was just about to go to class, that's all. With a heavy sigh, the man asked he was going to learn with a hammer. Why did he bring this nonsense with him? What he was even going to do? Gao said the first thing that came to mind was a boulder lying on the road, and he wanted to crack it. The teacher himself said to become successful, you have to build a road. And as for the wrench, so he's an avid amateur repairman and he's always carrying tools, even to school, that's all. Looking at the shovel behind the boy's back, the teacher asked why he needed it to dig a road, and the boy laughed at how perceptive this man was. It was obvious from the look on his face that the teacher didn't really believe in these stories. It looked like some kind of nonsense. The guy was obviously up to something and probably not good. With a heavy sigh, the man said that the road repairs could wait and that Gao needed to go somewhere with him for a few minutes. As soon as he finished speaking, a few uniformed military men grew behind him. Zhang raised his hand to stop them from doing anything stupid. The man's face was extremely puzzled, and he himself realized that the situation was not good, but there was nothing he could do against the military. Gao stood in his place, unable to move aside. They had returned sooner than the boy had expected, so they would have to improvise. Finally, the teacher raised his hands to the sky and said that he had been the boy's class teacher for years and was sure he had done nothing wrong. Hiding the wrench in his backpack, Gao said, as if nothing was wrong, and if he had to go through, he would go with them and would not resist. The teacher grabbed him by the shoulder and fervently began to tell him that the boy would just go along with him and explain everything. Nothing bad would happen. In a few minutes, they were already rushing down the highway in a military truck. The car was gaining momentum and roaring with the engine overtaking everyone else. The situation was critical, to put it mildly. All this time, the boy was thinking about how to get out of all this. He was declassified too quickly. After some more time, they found themselves in a large building. Gao was invited to enter a room behind heavy doors, guarded by 2 policemen. As soon as the boy went inside, he saw a long table where several people were sitting and discussing something. The lieutenant, as soon as he saw the boy, jumped up from his seat and asked, "Is it him?" The woman looked away fearfully. She would have liked to say something, but her voice was weak and quiet. The lieutenant put his hand up and said, "That was enough. It was okay." Approaching Gao, the lieutenant, trying to restrain his anger, asked if the boy knew why they had invited him here. Gao stood silent. He was well aware that the situation was clearly not in his favor, and probably the organization is serious. It was necessary to get rid of suspicion somehow, but Gao tried to act calmly. It was necessary to get rid of suspicion somehow, a normal person. Suddenly, out of the blue, the guy threw off his heavy backpack and launched it to the side in one deft motion. The lieutenant did not expect anything of the kind, and only with a surprised look, biting his lip, watched the strange incident. The man did not understand anything. Eventually, the kid grabbed hold of the lieutenant's leg and started tearfully begging him to let go. He realized the mistake and would never do it again. The man didn't understand what was going on. This guy seemed to have gone completely crazy. How could he behave like this in such a situation? The other soldiers looked at each other and sighed heavily. Is this the behavior of an excellent student, and he is the best in his class? The students are getting worse every year. Finally, a man dressed in a priest's robe stood up from his seat and shouted that the most important quality of a man is courage and bravery. There was also a third deputy. He smiled and said that, "Let Gao tell everything. If he made a mistake, is the sign of a good student." The man walked up to the boy and looked at him closely, and he whispered, "First, Gao has to tell them what he did." A chill ran down the boy's spine. His head was spinning with thoughts of whether to tell them or not. If he admits it, he'll dig his own hole, and then he'll be finished for sure. It was obvious that this deputy was a very slippery man. His eyes were literally blazing, and he was eager for recognition and reprisal. But the boy realized that the deputy just wanted to find a scapegoat to pin all the sins on, so he had to improvise. Clutching his head, Gao began to howl softly. All the others looked at him with surprised eyes and did not know what to say what this guy was up to. Eventually, the unfortunate man grabbed the leg of one of those present and began to wail, saying he had failed to live up to the director's trust and was looking for an easy way out. Hearing these words, the deputy swallowed his tongue, rephrased what did the guy just say? What other back door, what other Lieutenant Chin? Zhao tearfully continued to explain, but it all sounded so delusional that it couldn't be believed. What other backdoor Lieutenant Chin? Naturally, the deputy became furious and grabbed Gao by the scruff of the neck and asked him how he even ended up at the hotel and booked a room with an hourly rate. This is nonsense. Which back door he entered through in the first place, the lieutenant slowly boiled over. He held Gao by the shirt even tighter and lost his mind. Gao said he wanted to get in touch with the lieutenant to pass the exams, but when he wasn't there, he decided to leave. That's all he said. The lieutenant looked at Gao and gritted his teeth. It was definitely not what he wanted to hear. Continuing to whimper, Gao lied as if he had no money to renew the lease. Besides, his mother was waiting. The boy again wrapped his leg around, begging for mercy. He was looking for any way to escape punishment and at least somehow get out of here. The deputy repeated everything the guy had told him in a shaky voice and still couldn't believe it. He asked for his leg to be released for starters, at least. Everyone else who was here just didn't know what to say, and after all this, Gao still wants to go to military university, even if he doesn't dream of it. The man dressed as a priest snorted. He couldn't believe it. He had never heard anything more delusional in his life. Gao looked at everyone with eyes full of tears of contempt, just what he deserved the most. How ashamed he was at this moment. In the next room stood Shen. Through the big screen, she was watching everything going on and just kept silent without saying a word. How could she even allow her honor to be besmirched since she had such talents and innate ambition? The girl just didn't say anything. Finally, she couldn't stand it turning around. Shen asked, "And is that the same criminal they caught? This was meant to besmirch her honor." Finally, a man dressed as a priest told the boy to stand up. Let him not do such a thing ever again if he wants to enroll here. Looking at the lieutenant, he said that this boy really showed good results, and this whole situation was just a misunderstanding. Everything was cleared up. Finally, the third deputy managed to free his leg, and Gao moved back a little. Everything went exactly as he had planned. The deputy said he thought the boy was just an innocent kid, but first, if the military found him, he should let the lieutenant handle it. Lao Li wanted to object to something, but there were no suitable words. The man just looked away and did not know what to say. The lieutenant went to the principal and said he understood that he would protect his students, but he could not let this situation go unpunished. Eventually, the lieutenant became furious and grabbed the boy by the scruff of the neck and asked him if he knew how interrogation worked in military school. Then a scathing blow was heard. Chin hit the unfortunate man right in the stomach. Gao flew aside, holding onto his body. The unfortunate held onto his stomach and said that the lieutenant used the rat blood technique in any situation. Gao acted exactly the same way. Such insolence lieutenant could not forgive. This kid that will pretend to be dead in any situation is unthinkable. How can you do this? In the end, even the principal couldn't stand it. He stood up from his seat. Did the lieutenant really decide to punish the student in front of him? Chin wanted to say something. This had an effect, and the principal began to get angry. Does the experienced military want to lynch the child from somewhere? Teacher Zhang appeared. The lieutenant didn't know what to say. He stuttered. This guy got a hotel room in the middle of the night, so he had a couple questions. But it didn't work. The director asked if the boy just rented a hotel room was evidence. Besides, he'd be able to identify those who lived nearby. The front desk girl said in a shaky voice that Gao didn't know anything. She said the lieutenant lives next door, that's all. Eventually, the unfortunate woman realized she had said too much and almost bit her tongue. The situation was heating up. After gathering her strength, the poor woman said she could help this guy with his testimony. After all, she was a fearless woman. It worked perfectly. The director asked the lieutenant if he had any evidence. If not, he demanded the guy be released immediately. The lieutenant no longer knew what to say. He was defeated. The man realized that whatever he said would not be believed, so there was no point in trying. Meanwhile, Gao was triumphant. His plan had succeeded perfectly. After all, he knew how to talk to people. A few soldiers appeared. They trumped up and said that Tan and a man named Ah Si were awake and could now speak. Everyone in the room shuddered nervously. It was the same two guys who had been injured in the hotel incident. The military man added that the two said that before they entered the room, Gao should have already been there, the voice of the soldiers reflected. The lieutenant looked at the accused with a fierce look. He was ready to devour the poor boy right there. Since everything happened like this, the principals and teacher Zhang no longer have anything to hide because it's right then, there's no need to worry. Suddenly, a deputy intervened in the conversation. Well, of course, if something happens somewhere, then someone from the Tan family will be involved. The man laughed. The principal said that he trusts the lieutenant since he is a military. Qin put his hand to his temple and said that Yi will not lay a finger on this kid. Let them be sure. Waving his hand to the others, the lieutenant ordered them to guard the entrance until Tang and Shi were brought here. The military men obediently nodded their heads and left. And now the accused and the lieutenant were left alone in an empty room, the situation between them growing more and more heated. The lieutenant sat down in a large chair and sighed heavily, saying that they would have to wait a bit, but that was no problem. You could see from the boy's face that he was very worried. Besides, those two woke up and they're definitely going to put him behind bars. Is it really that bad? In the end, Gao didn't know what to think. There weren't many options left, but a second more, and something very bad could happen. Eventually, the military got two guys completely bandaged up, and they got hit pretty hard in that explosion. Tang started first. He shouted that when they entered the room, Shen was already unconscious, and they had come there to save her. She could only mumble. Looking at the accused, the lieutenant asked, "And how is the boy going to explain what these two now said if he has anything to say?" Scratching the back of his head, Gao pretended not to understand what we're talking about. Who Major Shen is, he doesn't know about it at all, and how could he know? After a bit of silence, the lieutenant said, "Really, maybe this guy is actually uninformed." Meanwhile, Tan continued when they came in. Major was on the bed and they had a fight, and this Gao guy beat them up out of nowhere. The lieutenant looked at them now and asked if this guy had done something to them or offended them in some way, but it was real nonsense. The lieutenant was angry again and grabbed the now crippled Tang by the scruff of the neck. He shouted that the major's room was up in smoke. How could Gao hurt them? Holding one of the bandaged guys by the scruff of the neck, the lieutenant looked at Gao and asked, "Is it really true?" The guy was silent for a second. Waving his hands, Gao played dumb and asked what was the matter, what they were talking about. He didn't know about any smoke. He said that Gao lives next door to the major, and he claims he doesn't know what was going on a meter away from him. Approaching the boy, the lieutenant said that he would not be able to keep silent forever, as there were many omissions and unfortunate mistakes in his words. It turned out that the assignment had been failed in front of the boy. A minute-long timer appeared, and now he would be penalized for failing. The lieutenant was getting angrier and angrier. He was ready to smash the boy against the wall and had already prepared his weighty fists. The timer was ticking inexorably. Only a few tens of seconds remained, and Gao sighed heavily. In a trembling voice, Gao said, "All right," he lied, "but isn't the lieutenant himself now doing the same thing?" Pointing at the two bandaged boys, Gao said the lieutenant was just now trying to justify them. The man gritted his teeth. Now Gao has already started attacking everything they have from the evidence is that the guy rented a hotel room, so what's his fault anyway? The lieutenant himself had arranged with the director in advance to make the boy a scapegoat and rented a hotel room. Shen watched all this. When the conversation went in such a direction, the girl tensed up, and this was already interesting enough. Pointing his finger at the lieutenant, the guy continued. He had been conspiring with the director to blame him for everything for a long time. The man clenched his fist and was unable to say anything at all. In the end, Gao decided to go all in. He waved his arms and shouted that he was about to be killed and asked for help as the timer was getting shorter. The lieutenant couldn't hold himself any longer and grabbed the unfortunate fellow by the scruff of the neck and hissed for him to shut his mouth immediately. Suddenly, the doors swung open noisily and the principal along with teacher Zhang appeared on the doorstep. As soon as the director saw this picture, he was stunned. The soldier holds the poor child by the scruff of the neck and tries to beat him. Indeed, the lieutenant looked like a rabid beast. He held the almost defenseless Gao and looked at him as if he were prey. He was clearly stronger. After that, the principal couldn't stand it anymore and shouted at the lieutenant to pull himself together. How dare he do that to a defenseless student? Teacher Zhang jumped up to his student and began to ask how he was feeling. Gao pretended to be completely shocked and stupefied and did not say a word. Suddenly, the guy swung his arms away and tried to defend himself as if he could still feel the lieutenant's grip on him. He was a good actor. Gao was trying hard to act hysterical, clutching his body and breathing heavily as if he was witnessing something terrible. The principal and the teacher tried to calm him down and said that no one would hurt the boy and that he had nothing to fear, but it was useless. Of course, putting on a play was a good idea, but the timer was about to run out and we had to think fast. The guy's teeth gritted. He had to find some way out to avoid failing the task, or it would be even worse, but it was unclear what to do. Now already, Gao began to act like a madman. He showed everyone his tongue and said that he was accused in vain. Well, he will agree in that case. Gao wandered around the room, saying she was the boy who had everyone wrapped around his finger. So what would they even do to him? Let them just try. The lieutenants looked at the strange kid with a surprised look, he that now admitted his guilt, or how to understand it. Looking at his assailant, Gao stretched his mouth and showed his tongue faithfully, just like that he had deceived Major Shen, and now nothing would be done to him. The teacher got to the boy just in time and covered his mouth with his hand in an attempt to stop all this flow, Brad. It was going to get worse. Now, Zhang was already furious. The soldier took advantage of his position and drove the child crazy with his interrogation. How could anyone do such a thing? The lieutenant cast his eyes down. Tan stood behind him and clapped him on the shoulder. Rather, let them tie up this criminal and they will be released. Gao, already lying on the floor, the good thing was that he had completed the mission at the last moment, and now he wouldn't get penalized. A virtual assistant appeared from somewhere and announced the launch of a random reward. It turned out to be an eye of deprivation. The virtual assistant explained that this eye allows him to see through everything and distinguish between truth and lies, so now he is literally omniscient. Gao gritted his teeth. The bad thing was that this was only an experimental edition, but how to make it legitimate was still unclear. On the screen, there was a recording of a teacher holding his student and trying to bring him to his senses, and it all looked very comical from the outside. Watching all this, Shen thought from the outside, it looked like this kid had gone crazy, but something was clearly wrong. She summoned Junior Lieutenant Chen. An obliging man appeared, who immediately bowed and saluted. With a smile on her face, Major ordered him to get Dr. Wang needs the help of a qualified doctor. An argument ignited between the principal and the lieutenant, and Gao sat on a chair and acted like he was crazy. Or was he really? In a concerned voice, the principal said that being in his position, he was obligated to keep the students safe, and was going to take Gao to the hospital right now. The tension between them grew stronger and stronger, it seems. These two men who were having a fight right now. Suddenly, a junior lieutenant appeared on the doorstep and addressed his immediate commander. The man's voice was straight and even. On the doorstep stood he along with a full-figured doctor named Wang. He had come on Major Shen's orders to examine the boy who seemed to have gone mad. The junior lieutenant reported that the doctor had come to examine Gao's chemical condition. On the major's orders, the doctor came closer. Mr. Wang wanted to say that he wanted to do a little inspection. However, facing the guys stunned. Pointing at the two guys with bandages, the doctor said that they could use a medical checkup too. The injured were very worried. The lieutenant said that because of the head trauma, these two may have been hallucinating, so we need to get a medical evaluation. The guys immediately jumped up from their seats and began to convince them that their mental state was actually normal. They didn't need a physical exam and didn't need to worry. The junior lieutenant looked at the two casualties and said that it was Major Shen's direct order, or they were willing to go against the military leadership. The deputy laughed. Since such a decision of the War Ministry, then of course they will show full cooperation. The man was clearly nervous. Dr. Wang fixed his big glasses and said they could take it easy. In all his time, he'd done over a few thousand screenings and no one had complained. The director was clearly nervous and asked what the inspection itself included, and he kept glancing at Gao, who was trying to play sick. Continuing to adjust his glasses, the doctor said that everything was simple. He would ask a few questions, and by that, he would determine the degree of mental damage of the patient. The director was surprised that it was so simple, but the doctor was a bit indignant. Did they doubt his professionalism? Seeing the irritation, the director wanted to justify himself, but the doctor was unstoppable, and he resented it. He was a specialist, and a certified one at that, so it was all right. But suddenly a huge knife and a handsaw fell to the floor with a clang. The others raised an eyebrow in surprise but said nothing, and there was silence. Picking up his instrument, the doctor said he performs surgery at a military hospital, so he keeps his instruments with him. It's professional. The silence continued to grow. Everyone else didn't know what to say. The doctor seemed like a slightly strange man, but what can you do? The man decided that enough talk, and pointing the knife at his patients, told them to stand in a line. For further inspection, the guys twitched. Gao's mind was full of thoughts at this point. If he was found insane, it would be a problem. There wasn't much time left. Eventually, they were put in a room together, and the doctor, holding a saw and a knife, said he would only ask one question, and they would have to answer. The man said, "Let them pretend they're being chased by a criminal who wants to take their lives." They ran into the bathroom, but there's a secret door. The only way to save them is to empty the bathtub so they can get inside. There is a basin and a spoon lying next to them, and they have to make the only decision. Tan immediately replied. Without hesitation, he chooses the basin. Of course, they find it easier to scoop the water out of the bathtub, that's all. As soon as the doctor heard the answer, he immediately started swinging his knives. Of course, he's mentally ill. Tan was horrified there had been a mistake. There were tears in the boy's eyes. It's just a misunderstanding. He's completely healthy, but Gao is actually sick, that's all. Realizing that he had made a mistake, the guy immediately said that in that case, he would choose the spoon. Then what was the problem? But immediately, a huge, sharp saw appeared near his neck. Tan looked at it and nervously began to breathe. There was clearly something wrong with this doctor. Mr. Wang laughed this too nutty. His glasses sat on his nose, and every now and then lifted because of the man's wide smile. Everyone else just stood there and looked at each other and wondered what kind of game it was that made it look like the doctor himself was really crazy. There was only one patient left. Gao doctor approached him and asked him what the guy would choose. In such a case, it was obvious that he hesitated in his answer. After a little thought, the guy answered that he would not choose anything, his voice sounding so smooth and natural, as if he were not in the hospital right now. The doctor laughed. That's how... So, what's he going to do? He's being chased by a criminal. The only chance of falling in is to jump in the bathroom. The director couldn't take it anymore, and asked the doctor to stop his questions. Don't make any sense. It's a delusional game, not a psychological test. After thinking for a few more seconds, Gao said that he would just take the plug out of the tub. That's all. He was silent, but continued to hold the tool in his hands. He came closer to the boy and asked him in a creeping voice if he was sure of his decision. Gao looked at him with a serious look. The silence between them was just incredibly heavy. The tension was building up. The two guys wrapped in bandages just stood there silent. After a few seconds, the doctor showed a thumbs up and said that this guy is completely healthy. Only a sane person would make an informed decision. The doctor looked at the others and asked if anyone had any objection or remark. The others only remained silent. The junior lieutenant and the director lowered their heads. This man really is a professional, as expected of a qualified doctor. Tan came to a rage. He thought the real nutcase here was the doctor. He didn't say anything to the cork or anything like that, did he? It was his mistake. Dr. Wang attacked him. A madman never confesses, and they call others madmen. The unfortunate boy asked his father for help. He wanted to be rescued from the madhouse, but was slapped on the cheek with a red stain. His father rushed at him. He grabbed his son by the scruff of the neck and shouted that he was actually the psycho here. Let him just admit it. Tan didn't know what to say in such a situation. He held onto his cheek that was burning with fire and just stuttered, "There is no way this can be." The deputy looked at Lieutenant Chin and said, "His son's self admitted to being mentally unwell, so what should be done with him?" Sighing heavily, the soldier said he would be under strict control at the military hospital until his trial began. The deputy asked how they would deal with Gao's apprentice, because given his recent confession means he lied and manipulated. But no. The junior lieutenant said that the major's orders were that if this boy's mental health was normal, he could be released. Then, the junior lieutenant handed the boy the phone and said that he was obliged to keep it with him in any circumstances needing his assistance. Eventually, Gao walked out of the damn office, holding a device in his hands. If the major had given it to him, then it was definitely bugged or something. The guy thought to himself that he needed to get the treasure chest as soon as possible and protect himself to increase his strength, then no one would be able to get in his way. Meanwhile, the major sat in her office and compared facts, some of which were similar to this guy and some of which were different. The girl did not understand only one thing: why she had fainted. Was it really a dream? She convinced herself that it was just a dream. Shen was still sitting in her room. Whether it was a dream or not, she might be able to find out by watching him closely. Smirking Major thought to herself, today this guy will learn what is real acting and intelligence. Well, nothing. Suddenly, the phone rang in the boy's pocket, vibrating and sending an unpleasant shiver through his entire body. The unsuspecting Gao sneezed, his whole body shivered in surprise, and he stopped for a second and looked up. Wiping his nose, the boy wondered if he might be in grave danger or if someone was watching him. He was very sovereign. The principal and teacher heard him sneezing and immediately said that he was healthy, for the entrance exams need to write them well. They even offered to walk together because they lived near the school, but Gao refused and waved goodbye to them. He wanted to be alone with himself. The principal sighed heavily. Although this guy is good in theory, but in practice, his knowledge is not good at all. How difficult it will be for him. On the way, Gao could not get rid of the two girls of easy behavior who invited him to go with them. It was getting annoying. Finally, he stopped and asked them if they had a man with abs, who was very strong, who had a beautiful body. The girls looked at him in surprise. pulling out of the embrace and telling them to stop pestering him for cheap pleasures. He called a cab and said he needed to go to the northern suburbs psychiatric hospital. The cab driver warned him it would be very expensive, so he had the money ready. After a bit of haggling, the guy managed to lower the price a bit, and the cab driver agreed to me though. After all, this passenger knows how to bargain. The man behind the wheel wondered why he was going to such a place so late in the day, and Gao replied that he was just going on a trip. After that, the cab driver was even more surprised. What kind of trip? Who in their right mind was going to drive to the asylum at night? It sounded like nonsense. Putting on an old hockey mask, Gao made his voice more scary and low and said he was going to travel to a mental hospital. The cab driver was horrified. The man did not even know what to say. He began to suspect that next to him in the car is a real madman. It was terrible. In addition, the radio began to broadcast that recently, in psychiatric hospitals began to occur strange cases. Everyone was advised to be careful. The frightened taxi driver still couldn't stand it and hit the brakes sharply. The car ran tires and stopped. Turning to his strange passenger, the man said that this guy was probably a great man, so he would do a good deed today and not take any money. In a hoarse voice, taking his briefcase, Gao said that he was a good man and thanked the cab driver. Finally, the guy started looking for something. The cab driver heard some strange rustling and became cold with fear. His mind was swarming with thoughts, and he began to fear for his life in earnest. But as soon as the passenger took out of his huge backpack a large sledgehammer, the man was even more frightened. Gao explained that it was for road repair. Also, with a loud sound, a large wrench flew out of my backpack and fell to the floor of the car. The situation was getting out of control. The cab driver was covered with cold sweat on his back. He had goosebumps. His voice was shaking. Is that also for road repair? The guy answered, yes. Finally, Gao slid out of the car holding his backpack in his hands. The door slammed shut abruptly behind him, and the lock clicked. The cab driver pressed the pedal, and the car screeched forward, disappearing into the darkness without even taking a fare. Gao remained standing on the road in utter bewilderment. Apparently this man is really a good man, didn't take the money. Maybe he practices Buddhism. Suddenly, a motorcycle stopped, not far from the guy, squealing its tires. Gao stood on the other side of the road, but still heard the roar of the engine. It was Major. She was following the guy and wanted to show him what psychosis looks like at the highest level if he's so smart. Meanwhile, being in his home, the deputy was furious. He demanded an explanation from the lieutenant as to how all this was even understood. Heard his lieutenant acquaintance say it's bullshit, not everyone will agree to cooperate with the League. From their conversation, you could tell that these two were in cahoots, or related. They were talking about the League, wanting to clear the area. Eventually, the phone buzzed briefly, and the lieutenant hung up, leaving the deputy completely bewildered. From such insolence, the man threw the phone on the table. He could not tolerate such treatment. He was treated like a child. The man breathed heavily. All he needed was a little patience. A few more days would pass, and the lieutenant would come to him with his request. There was a glint of metal in the deputy's eyes. After all, the information he has is a bunch of magnets, so we'll have to do it right. In a large room sat two people. One man was dressed in a hoodie, and in front of him was kneeling elf woman. The stranger was interested in information about the magnetic pile. The elven woman urged him to wait a little longer, to mend relations. You can't just cut them off, especially since they have an army. Meanwhile, Major dressed up in specific clothes like a real mental patient and slathered herself in mud for authenticity. She mussed her hair to look more like a psycho than anything else, and headed for the doors of the mental institution that everything would work out. She pulled her phone out of her pocket and started tracking Gao. Most likely the guy wasn't here yet and would be here soon. She had a few more minutes. Walking along the street a few meters, the girl finally saw a familiar silhouette and leisurely gait approached for a few steps. Gao was standing at the entrance to the establishment and had already grabbed the door handle in an attempt to pull it open. His backpack still as huge as ever. Major hid behind the nearest doors and was already preparing to scare him. The girl was all smeared with mud, and as soon as Gao saw her, he would be scared. As soon as the doors opened, the Major rushed at him with shouts, expecting that the effect would not be too long in coming. But instead of Gao, a huge man with a stupid expression and an eye patch appeared in front of the girl. It looked like a real psycho. In the end, Major cried out in surprise, and tears appeared in her eyes. The girl did not expect that in front of her was a real madman. Hearing her loud scream on the other side of the asylum, Gao stood by the door and thought that it was not easy for the patients in this institution. The unfortunate man was already lying unconscious, saliva dripping from his mouth, and it looked like he was in worse shape than the Major as soon as he saw her. The girl, from surprise, did not calculate the strength and hit, really disabling the man instantly. It was a real psycho, quite creepy. Eventually, Gao was inside too. The factory had long been abandoned and was in such a poor state that it was as if no one had taken care of it. On the floor were lying some, and also, what is important, puddles of blood or something else. Yes, and the smell here was appropriate. Clutching the hammer tightly in his hands, the guy walked a few steps forward, just to finish this and be done with it. Suddenly, a strong wind blew. Although where would it come from here? The intruder clutched his eyes and prepared to fight back against anything. The guy had already swung the sledgehammer to bring the heavy hammer down on the one who dared to attack him, and the sledgehammer whistled through the air. As it turned out, it was an ordinary black cat. There were quite a few stray cats here, but Gao was not weakly frightened. It was not surprising in such a place. Pulling the mask on himself, the guy thought it would be better if he was not known by sight, so he could hide from his pursuers. Meanwhile, watching him through the computer screen were two men sitting on chairs and smoking cigars. It seems these madmen are not afraid of anything at all. The man with the long hair ordered the others not to slack off. If everything goes as it should, he will personally buy everyone a drink at his own expense. The older man wasn't even going to talk to them and ignored all questions. He wouldn't talk to them until their mission was over. Throwing his walkie-talkie on the table, the man was indignant. They are not professionals. What a nonsense, just a bunch of bums, that's all. Eventually, the rest of the participants in the incident were already dressed up in costumes like Halloween, each personified a creepy creature. In front of us stood the creepy clown girl from the movie Curse and some other monster they wanted to be actors, even despite what they became. In front of them stood another man dressed in some kind of ghost costume, saying that despite everything, they had good hearts and dreams. This speech had the right effect on them all, raised their hands in the air and shouted in one voice to realize their dreams. Meanwhile, Gao walked around the empty room and looked around the place. It was a bit creepy, especially at night. The guy's ears heard some strange sounds. There can't be ghosts here, it's crazy. But why does he hear them? Suddenly, lightning flashed from somewhere, and thunder rumbled. Gao stopped for a second and froze in place behind him. Something was definitely happening. Turning behind him, the boy saw some strange silhouette of someone wrapped in a rag, hanging from a rope suspended from the ceiling. It was someone disguised as a ghost, wearing a horrible mask with a long tongue and burning eyes, and a long howl was heard. It really scared the guy, and he opened his eyes wide, even through the mask, and his heart stopped for a second. Frightened, Gao decided that the best defense is offense, and rushed with a sledgehammer at the stranger who shouted for the guy to stop. But the boy was unstoppable, and he brought the heavy sledgehammer down on the ghost's head with a resounding thud. In the end, the ghost went to the other world for the second time. Under the mask, showed a face completely covered with bruises. Through the mask, Gao's voice sounded even more intimidating. The guy growled that he didn't authorize him to be intimidated. Standing in front of the lifeless body, Gao realized that these people were just pretending to be ghosts to scare the incoming people. It's a crime, you can't do that. Wrapping the body of the unfortunate man in a sheet more tightly, Gao tried to hide the traces of his actions, but it hardly seemed to help. A virtual assistant appeared and congratulated the boy on his victory. Unfortunately, there was no award, the robot asked. Is the host upset? Waving his hand away from the annoying assistant, Gao said that if he relied on the system for everything, he would have long gone to the other world from hunger. In his hands, he already had a few coins to earn money, is not to ask for them but to steal. Here is the result, first money. The boy began to jump on the spot with happiness. Here he already has 500 allied coins, he is truly rich. Joy was unbounded. After doing some simple calculations in his mind, Gao realized that in order to earn the necessary amount of money, he must fight 200 ghosts, are there only. Meanwhile, Ghost dressed in a scary girl costume, worried that his mate hadn't shown up yet. Is it really that hard to scare a child? Suddenly strange sounds came to his ears, and he turned his head, deciding to go check it out. Coming out from around the corner of the gloomy ghost, listened and heard Gao's calculations. He seemed to be counting the gold coins that would be received for the ghosts, but it was unclear why. The man dressed in the suit approached a few steps away. Gao heard someone's footsteps in the silence and listened for a second. He turned his face, clad in a bloody mask, and looked with such a terrifying gaze that even Ghost was frightened. The man was so impressed that he immediately screamed out of surprise as the wig flew off his head and rose a few centimeters into the air. Realizing how to make money, Gao rushed after the man he saw in him, only a source of income. The unfortunate man ran away. In the end, he too suffered the same fate. He was already lying unconscious. Gao rejoiced. 200 ghosts no longer seemed such an impossible task to him. He looked at his tools and thought that getting through the first human limit made him want to destroy them all. Turning around, the guy thought maybe he should bury the poor guy, but it's not right after all, and he has a shovel. But digging a hole is too difficult and time-consuming, so Gao immediately discarded the thought. On the other hand, it's just a hapless ghost. Putting the hammer on his shoulder, he thought that he should find a couple more of them, and in principle, he could dig a grave and make money. Suddenly, a clown and a masked man appeared in front of him. They were furious. What kind of psychopath came here and arranged all this? How can you rob them? But instead of being frightened, Gao, on the contrary, shone with happiness. Money itself floats into his hands. Now he will become rich. Grabbing a hammer and wrench, the guy got ready to crumble and destroy the two ghosts, didn't realize what was up and who this guy was. Eventually, those were finished too. Now two lifeless bodies lay on the ground. Gao lamented. How boring it was to be invincible after all. The money itself goes into his hands. No test. The guy wanted to leave the building to do nothing here anyway. There were 4 ghosts outside, so there would be more inside. Gao went into the next room, and only the sound of his footsteps could be heard everywhere. But unfortunately, there were no more ghosts nearby. Gao thought that he only had 200 coins. Where else would he find the others? Suddenly, a soft hand was placed on his shoulder, just in time to hear a terrible howl, and Gao stopped for a second and listened. Here comes the ghost guy swinging the sledgehammer and hitting with all his might in an attempt to hit the monster at once. He pulled his mask back on. It was time to make money. Gao took a closer look and prepared to attack the ghost. A few meters away from him stood a girl. It was Major, but Gao did not know it yet. Her thin voice was heard. Really now was terrifying. She was holding a bear toy that she was tearing apart and humming some scary children's song. But it didn't work, and the storm of all ghosts rushed right at her, swinging a sledgehammer and a wrench. But instead of colliding with the ghost's body, the sledgehammer hit the floor with a very loud and ear-splitting sound. The ghost continued to hum his creepy song and was already behind the boy's back, and then Gao was really scared. He started swinging the sledgehammer again to hit his enemy, but it was all in vain. The hammer was just tearing the air. Eventually, the strange girl disappeared from sight, but from somewhere came her thin voice. The song continued on and on. Quickly pulling himself together, Gao thought that this girl is not like the others. This ghost is well prepared. Well then, they will play. Her silhouette again appeared from the darkness. She approached in small steps, directly to the guy. Gao stood still and waited for the right moment to attack. It's not a ghost, but an ordinary psycho. Gao decided to tear off his mask and rush towards the girl. The song stopped for a second. I realized that it was the usual psycho. Gao decided to play a game, and in a gentle voice, smiling, said that children should not sing such terrible songs. Major too decided to play this game and took the image of a silly little girl offering to dance. It looked very strange. She held out her hands to the guy and said she would clap and he would dance. Gao tried to look as friendly as possible, and yet he agreed. It was part of his plan. The guy waited until she let her guard down, and then he could send her to the other side. But suddenly his skill worked. He looked closely and saw familiar features in this girl. Behind the disheveled hair, he saw Major Shen. Yes, indeed, there can be no mistake. It's definitely her, just what she's doing. Now Gao was really scared, but what she was doing here in such a place at such a time gave him goosebumps. A horrible thought crept into my head. Did he get found out what it was all about? They sent her here on purpose or what? But it seems Major got into character a lot and kept saying she wanted to dance and clap her hands. From this angle, she looked like a psycho. There was nothing left but to agree, and in a trembling voice, Gao said that so-and-so would clap and dance. The election still did not remain. At this time, in the front office, 2 men were sleeping everywhere. Only their loud snoring seemed that they do not notice anyone at all come in who wants. As the alarm clock suddenly crackled, the hated device jumped up in its place and began to make a shrill, nasty sound. The fat man behind the command post said it was time to wake up for another report, and the older man grumbled grudgingly that the ghosts weren't here yet. The old man looked closely and began to study the screens, but immediately his face changed, and something very strange was happening there. The older man immediately jumped up to him and started questioning what he saw there. The man was staring at the monitor with sleepy eyes. The screen showed Gao and some weird girl. They were playing hands, but this ghost team. The older man came in furious that they had even set up there. It wasn't at all according to plan, but the other man said to look the other way. On the second screen were the bodies of all the ghosts. They were for some reason lying face down and not moving. It looked like they had fainted. The man looked at the older man and asked in a frightened voice, "What should they do? Can they go and deal with them?" The older man shouted that he was talking nonsense. Taking a person's life is not as easy as it seems, but there was something wrong with these two. It should have been reported immediately. Everything was not going according to plan. The man behind the command center nodded his head. He had already reported the necessary information. And now Gao was playing hands with the major and wondering how she even found him. She was following him, or exposed him, or ran into him by accident. And the girl, as if nothing happened, played her role and clapped her hands, seemed to bring her sincere pleasure. Gao also clapped, but couldn't understand, no matter how you are. Her intentions, she still has no proof. At some point, he realized he'd said it out loud and covered his mouth with his hand. Now, he was definitely getting caught in the act. Major dropped the mask of the crazy girl and now looked real. She came closer and closer. The girl felt the energy. Looking at him, Shen said that Gao most likely recognized her immediately. Otherwise, he would be afraid to even approach her. So, what's the matter? And the guy himself realized that now any of his careless steps could be fatal. He had to think over every word. He grabbed the sledgehammer and prepared to strike. If we can't talk, we'll have to send her to the afterlife. No choice. But to his horror, he noticed that the girl blocked the powerful blow of the sledgehammer. With one hand, the iron began to melt and turn into liquid. Eventually, she found herself in her armor, and the sledgehammer became just a piece of iron in the girl's hands. Zhao now realized who was standing in front of him was an energy warrior and rushed to the exit of the asylum as soon as possible. Laughing at him, Shen smiled and asked if he thought he could escape like that. A second later, the shackles snapped on the unfortunate fellow's legs and restrained his movements instantly. The poor man lost his balance and fell to the floor on his knees with his back turned to his enemy. Looking at him, Major smiled even wider and offered to say her last words, or he would go to the other world in silence. Trying to joke, Gao replied that it was too early for him to say the last words at such a young age. They were in too much of a hurry. Suddenly, he jabbed his finger in front of him and shouted for the girl to be careful, but Major didn't believe it was too cheap a trick. But at some point, a dragon appeared and rushed forward, protecting his master. Some strange man behind his back blocked his blow. He immediately realized it was iron control. Interesting, after all. It turns out the dragon was standing across from him and breathing fire with rage. 3 people were now standing in front of them, a man in a white suit, another man in a black shirt, and a woman with long red hair. Major herself realized that these guys are not simple and was already preparing to attack opponents, stood motionless, and also prepared to take a blow. Turning to the guy, she asked if he was with them too. Gao just raised his hand and said no, he had no idea who they were and had never seen them. This question was purely symbolic. Major smiled and said that she thought so too. If this were true, Gao would have been on this world a long time ago. The woman with red hair said that the information was confirmed. Shen does not look like a normal crazy girl, so it is correct. The other man smiled and said that she was alone anyway, and handling her wouldn't be as much of a challenge. No big deal. The man in the white suit bowed and introduced himself. His name was Makoto. He was unmarried, and he was somewhere in his 30s looking. The major did not hesitate for a second and introduced herself with the name Gao. The guy sat behind her back and did not even know what to say. His jaw literally dropped from surprise. Without thinking for long, the Japanese man put his hand forward and shot the accumulated energy directly at the girl. A bright white light spilled everywhere and the air vibrated. The Iron Dragon took the brunt of the attack, his body glowing red hot. The man attacked harder and harder, his pressure felt with every passing second. A smile appeared on his face, and he felt his superiority. The girl was all alone, and there were 3 of them. The Iron Dragon grabbed the attacker's arm and held on tightly. The iron was glowing hotter and hotter as the man literally burned with fire, but the monster held him. From such a bright light, the unfortunate Gao, to whom no one was already paying attention, closed his eyes to see if it was too bright for night, a real day outside. Just about to break out a monstrous battle, the dragon was flying in the air, trying to repel the attacks of 3 attackers. At once, the girl was beside him. The monster wriggled like a kite. It moved incredibly smoothly despite its enormous size. Shen skillfully guided it. Gao, who had been sitting to the side the entire time, watched with open eyes this battle between 2 energy warriors, looking truly mesmerizing. A pesky virtual assistant appeared from somewhere again. He offered the host to take a task. The guy didn't quite understand what they wanted him to do, but eventually, he realized what was wrong and grabbed hold of the robot. If there was a chance to save himself, then let it be. It was a mission. He began to shake the device. He heard the utterly delusional quest and immediately threw the iron to the floor. The unfortunate robot hit the ground and fell silent. How dumb is that? The boy realized that there must be some clue that everything could not be so confusing and tried to find the right way out. But in addition to the annoying robot choosing the highest difficulty level, Gao grabbed onto it and began cursing the hated iron. But the assistant recommended choosing this particular difficulty, for there is a very good chance of getting a rare reward not worth ignoring. Hearing the following words, Gao became cold with fear. A person is born and goes to the other world. There is an early and a late period, but what could it mean? Suddenly a strange sound came to my ears from behind, and an explosion was heard. The boy was startled again and turned his head back easily. The iron dragon had merged with the fire and now burned like a mythical creature. The monster flew high and aimed for another strike. Makoto feeling. His power said that any iron can be melted, so how is this girl going to fight him in this condition? She lost, and that is clear. Behind everyone stood Gao and pondered. This guy is a very strong mage. He manipulates magnesium energy, a strong opponent to fight with. At this difficulty, the iron dragon would indeed be melted in seconds. Besides, it had already started to disintegrate into pieces due to the excessive temperature. It is a steel dragon that is at that stage when it will soon turn into a spirit. The monster looked at Makoto almost closely and roared. The man who had not expected such a turn of events was stunned in his seat and only opened his eyes wide in surprise. The other two members of the attack simply stood back and opened their mouths in surprise at their leader being defeated in just a second. Gao didn't know what to say either. The high-level energy warrior was defeated in just a split second. Major literally sizzled him. Looking down at them and smiling, Major turned to the others, and whichever of them would fight her next, let them attack. The remaining man, though, recognized that the dragon was strong enough, but he would still decide to try his strength. The woman behind his back nudged him. The two of them rushed at the flaming monster as if they thought they could do something, but the dragon was too strong for the two of them, and then there was a rumble. The girl with red hair prepared to attack. A strange flap of strange fabric appeared near her and grew larger with each passing second. The dragon was entangled in the thing and could no longer move quietly. He tried to break free to no avail. The grip was really strong. The man laughed. Even if her iron is not melted, it is not protected from corrosion, so it will be over soon. The woman also laughed. Her element was much stronger and more stable than iron, so there was nothing to hope for. It was all over. Eyes wide open, Gao finally realized it was the two elements, sulfur and copper. Surprising how sinister this pair in tandem could be. Crawling back a few steps, the guy realized that he didn't have the strength to get into this fight yet, or he would say goodbye to his life. Major, continuing to control her dragon, recognized that her metal was unable to resist these two elements. However, it's not that simple. The girl blurted out a smile and asked, "These two are sure that this is all she can do, as it is foolish to assume that this is the end." The two attackers were stunned in their seats and didn't know what to say. The dragon changed. It stopped glowing and turned black as night. Shen took out another black-colored pill from her pocket and unclenched her fingers and released it outward on the girl's face. A smile continued to gleam on her face. As soon as the incomprehensible pill split in two, the girl's suit began to glow with a bright light, as if absorbing her energy into itself. Again shutting herself off from the bright light, Gao didn't realize she was the princess of metal. How was it even possible? How many secret and hidden skills she had? Here, it was too dangerous, so the frightened boy decided to make a hasty retreat. Tactical retreat is the key to success. The two attackers were so frightened that they decided to retreat. They realized that they could not fight this girl, and it was better to save their lives. But who said that the major would let them go so easily? The girl smiled a little too late to think about her safety and prepared to attack. Something began to change in front of her. A huge figure appeared. Major reached forward and touched a huge fist that appeared out of nowhere. The girl with red hair was trying to get away from the line of attack. She saw something huge and horrible that she couldn't handle. She tried to use some sort of defense spell and put up an energy shield, but it wasn't likely to do her any good. A huge, golden-colored metal hand struck her with such force that she couldn't stand on her feet and flew backwards. She was tumbling on the hard ground, unable to control herself. It was very painful, but the woman could not do anything in such a situation. Eventually, she crashed into the wall, leaving several cracks. She coughed heavily and breathed through the impact was of incredible force. Suddenly, they crossed eyes with the fleeing Gao. For a second, between them fortunate silence, each looking in his own direction and wanting, of course, to keep alive. Realizing who he was facing, Gao bounced back and waved his hands, thinking that the girl would attack him, although it is unlikely that she could in such a state. But you can see in the girl's eyes that she herself is very afraid of this stranger. She thinks he's as strong as the major. Gao Yi realized it himself. They don't know his origins. They only know that he's Shen's friend. You have to bluff. Maybe just take her down and that's it. But he did not have time to finish his thought. Near Gao stopped a huge metal golem and stepped so hard on the ground that everything around trembled. He was truly colossal in size, stood on his huge arm, and controlled his pet, if you could call it that. Now both the attackers and Gao himself were frightened. If things went on like this, the Major would just bury everyone here alive, and that was the last thing he wanted to do. Suddenly, the woman began to wail. She asked Old Man Yaga to help her. She even promised to sleep with him for a couple of nights. It sounded strange to say the least. It was already clear what would happen to her. If Golem only hit this girl, there would only be a bloody stain on her. The options ended with wolves in front of him and tigers behind him. Gao thought that if he managed to be reborn, he would reboot this system and it would all be over, though unlikely. Shen skillfully played the role she was also bluffing. Let everyone think that the guy was actually stronger than her, so it would be easier. It's finally starting to dawn on the guy that they switched identities, if only temporarily, so that everyone would think it was a good ploy. But on the other hand, is Gao the kind of person who allows himself to be manipulated? The guy smiled. Good job, he praised the soldier. Now they would see who would set who up. Gao began to prepare his attack, or pretend he was going to attack. He kept his hands at the ready. The unfortunate girl with red hair has already completely lost her mind and did not know what to do. She resigned herself to the fact that now we'll go to the other world. Meanwhile, the two men in the command center were speechless. They couldn't believe that this was really happening, and it was time to retire. Finally, the older man decided that it was time to stop all this carnival. He decided to do the girl. The old man shakily agreed. Meanwhile, being in his palace, the third deputy woke up. The elf next to him said that the major spoken of was now at the factory. She turned to her lover and said that Tang Day hadn't told Lieutenant Chin about it yet, right? The man grimaced, and at first didn't understand what she was talking about or what she meant. There was a look of obvious concern on his face. Throwing the phone over her back, the elfess said that there was no point in hiding the fact that the deputy wanted to work together with the Union, but the situation was not the best. She had guessed it all long ago, and licked her lips. The woman knew exactly what she wanted to get out of it. The deputy tried to grab her by the throat. He vowed to send her to the other side of the world if she tried to get in his way, but the woman was calm. She showed a small switch, and in a sweet voice, said that the factory was full of explosives. If she pressed the button, everyone would blow up. The woman took his hand and kissed it, but the deputy growled that it wouldn't take him by surprise, so it was okay. Tired of talking about it, the woman stood up and threw off her blanket, leaving her without clothes. She said she would go from here. The man sat on the bed with his head down. He realized that he was in a desperate situation, but could do nothing. He was deceived and tricked more than once. Meanwhile, in the factory, a real nightmare was going on. Everyone froze in their seats, waiting for the denouement Gao successfully bluffed. But that's for now. He stood in front of his opponent, and as if he was preparing to attack, but so far he did nothing. The woman was still afraid. Suddenly, the guy put his hand behind his scruff, as if in an attempt to get something out. The poor frightened girl held her breath and braced herself. In the hands of Gao was a wrench. The woman raised an eyebrow in surprise and did not realize he was going to fight with it. Swinging his tool, Gao screamed with all his might and struck directly at his shackles that had been restraining his legs until that moment. Of course, he was not going to fight and turned around and ran in the opposite direction. Closer to the exit, the woman did not understand anything and froze. Eventually, Major couldn't stand it, and the huge steel golem hit the unfortunate girl with a huge fist. Shen screamed with rage where he was going. Running up to the nearest sewer, the guy saw a cat that had attacked him a little earlier. Isn't that a sign or a gift of fate? Without waiting for anyone, Gao quickly threw open the hatch and skirted into the sewers, flying down the drain, followed by the Major's curse. The girl was furious. Did he really think he would be able to do anything or escape? Shen possessed many talents, let him not even try. A sparkling smile appeared on her face. The suit lit up, building up energy. Now she would bury them all right here and now. Stopping a few meters away, Gao was breathing heavily now. She wouldn't be able to keep up with him. After all, that's what the guy had been trying to convince himself. But on the other hand, this golden golem can't get in here. He's like a needle in a haystack. He's hidden, and now no one will find him. Gao's mind was spinning with thoughts. Of course, he was sad that he couldn't complete the task, but it was better to keep his life than to go to the other world. Suddenly, from the darkness of the corridor came the Major shouting for Gao to tell her everything, and she would consider whether to let him live or not. For a moment, a strange thought came to mind. Shouldn't the Major be ashamed of running around the sewers like a real rat? Gao shuddered. Okay. He agreed and shouted into the darkness that if the Major caught him, he would tell her anything the girl wanted and more. Standing a few meters away, Shen pondered, need to think faster, otherwise he'll be so gone, and it will be impossible to find him. The solution came immediately. She touched one of the sewer pipes and applied an echolocation spell. A vibration was heard everywhere as Gao, standing there, heard it and stopped for a second as something was happening behind him, as if a huge monster was approaching. A few seconds later, a huge metal dog with burning eyes literally emerged from the darkness and moved incredibly fast. And now it was really dangerous. Gao was scared how he was going to escape from those monsters at all. Thank God there was a small manhole leading somewhere deep into the sewers, and Gao could think of nothing better than to just climb in there, at least to hide. The two mechanical dogs stopped, their paws scraping the monsters' heads, looking for their prey, but so far the guy was nowhere to be seen. But it wasn't long before the monster quickly found the right path and slipped into the same tunnel Gao had slipped into so recently. Gao ran down one of the tunnels and tried to get away somehow. How fast these monsters run. Can these dogs really have consciousness? An interesting thought slipped into his mind. Energy wars are very cool, and Gao should also become the same in the future for sure. Meanwhile, the Major, along with her metal pets, ran down one of the tunnels and yelled that the guy couldn't get away. Once again, Gao crawled into some tunnel and tried to crawl forward. It was very slippery, but there was no time to think. After a second, the guy stopped in front of his eyes. There was something dark on his back, ran goosebumps. Is it really the end? And here, his life will end. The thing is that the way was blocked by several dozen boxes with some garbage. Apparently someone left them here during construction work. Finally, angry Gao just kicked one of the boxes out of impotence. Who even thought of leaving a dead end in the middle of the sewer here? A few seconds later, the Major appeared surrounded by his nightmare dogs. She asked why the guy didn't keep running away. The girl laughed and smiled again. She had said that Gao would not leave her so easily, even if she didn't hope it. Her eyes glistened with joy. The Major decided to give him a few seconds to explain how he snuck into her room and why he decided to attack her. Between the two people, tension was gradually building up. Gao did not say anything. The metal dogs waited for their mistress's command, but did not attack yet. For a second, Major thought about it. An expression of fear and anxiety appeared on her face, and she thought that it might not be trash. She finally shouted for Gao to get out of there as soon as possible and rushed to the guy's aid, suddenly forgetting her anger. Something began to happen to his back, and Gao didn't immediately feel the heat and bright yellow light spilling everywhere, but the guy was still standing there as if nothing had happened. A second later, everything began to shake, and there was a huge explosion. The smell of something burning could be heard everywhere, the blast wave spreading. The entire building of this warehouse went up in flames. In just seconds, the explosion was so powerful that even all the nearby buildings began to shake. And only now they realized that the crates were filled with explosives. Gao was just a few meters away and did not have time to react. He covered himself with his hand. The Major ran towards him in an attempt to somehow save him. She released several energy tentacles straight forward to do anything at all. Gao didn't quite realize what had happened yet. The energy outgrowths were moving towards him. The guy said that now was not the best time to destroy it. But without realizing it, he was in some kind of protective bubble. But why this girl tried to save him is beyond me. She jumped even closer and used the golden orb to disperse the wave from the explosion. The fire began to dissipate, but not for long. In a second, they were in some kind of dome that looked like a butterfly cocoon, but made of some very flexible metal. Gao together with the Major were inside and in relative safety, although the iron began to glow under the pressure of the fire. In the end, when Major came to her senses, she was immediately angry. This was the third attack on her in a day. Today, he was definitely finished. She grabbed Gao by the scruff of the neck and lifted him above the ground. The guy started waving his arms and screaming, although it was useless. He asked if the Major thought it was strange that she wanted to destroy him, but had saved him for the last time. Didn't she get tired of doing it? The angry girl looked at him and said that was bullshit. She gave 10 seconds for an explanation. There was still half a second left to set things straight. A virtual robot appeared and said that there were 5 minutes left to complete the task, and that we had to hurry. Gao rolled his eyes. The Major was beginning to lose her patience. She was counting down, and there were only a few seconds left to go. After pondering for a moment, Gao realized that a woman's heart is indeed fickle in that case. Let her not blame him for being ruthless at this moment. For a second, Major stopped, and her face turned blue with fear. The girl began to shake her whole body and stutter. Gao released from her grasp and waved his hands. She had forgotten that this place was a sewer and full of rats, and the guy seemed to have figured it out. He has odors, came out a small animal. It had glowing eyes. It was a big sewer rat. With a loud squeak, the animal lunged at the girl. Major covered herself with her hands. In an attempt to somehow defend herself, she momentarily lost her courage. It was the perfect moment to finish her off. The guy smiled and got ready, grabbing his wrench. With only a few seconds left, the wrench had already soared into the air. Gao was like a monster girl at this moment was defenseless, with a rat sitting on her head. The next moment, Major felt something heavy and metallic descend on her head, and her eyes began to darken. The girl looked at her attacker, but consciousness slowly left her head. She wanted to say something, but didn't have time. Stars sprinkled from her eyes, Shen from such a strong blow could not withstand, and began to lose consciousness, falling to the ground. Just as her body made contact with the ground, the time for the task was over. Gao stood beside her and waited for something. The robot was incredibly happy and congratulated his master for completing the task, but Gao was not. As a reward, a treasure chest began to hang in the air. All that was left was to open it, and the task could be considered complete. Gao glowed with happiness. He went through all this for the chest and roulette. Of course, the guy decided to choose roulette, it would be better. But to his disappointment, as a reward, he received silk that will help him in the future. Gao instantly became upset. Out of anger, he grabbed the poor robot and started squeezing it, and for the sake of all this, he went through this nightmare, unthinkable. The anger stopped as soon as Gao heard that he actually had a Dan Tian pill that could purify the soul as well. This pill had another property. It amplified all of a person's senses, almost to the limit, and allowed them to overstep their boundaries. Holding this strange object in his hands, the guy smiled, enhancing all 5 senses. That sounds like a pretty good effort. Although his spiritual knowledge isn't too deep, if he enhances those feelings, it will still count as an earned bonus. Leaning over the Major's breathless body, he again became frustrated with the unknown of when this girl would wake up and what to do with her at all. Gao grabbed the rope, and another sneaky thought occurred in his head. Gao immediately began to bind the girl as tightly as possible so that she would definitely not break free or it would be bad. Eventually, the Major found herself tied up so tightly that she resembled a caterpillar. Gao clapped her hands together. Now it wasn't a problem. Time to taste the pill. The guy took it with 2 fingers and presented it to his mouth. It gave off a strange warmth. Who knows what will happen next? After he ate the weird thing, he laid down on his backpack. Good thing there's another painful and satisfying moment. It had been more than 5 minutes, but nothing was happening. Gao opened his eyes. Didn't it work again? Yes. What's wrong with this system, Guy pondered. But suddenly, someone's footsteps came to his ears. Apparently, they were very far away, but Gao heard them perfectly well. They were so loud that they had to cover their ears. Where did they come from underground here, and how do you even understand it? Gao held his head. Now, before him, appeared a hologram of absolutely everything that happens on the surface. He perfectly saw, heard, and felt. Upstairs stood the 3rd deputy along with some elf girl. They were talking amongst themselves and talking about some body. From the voice, Gao immediately recognized the 3rd deputy Tangdi only. What body are they talking about? Yes, and they are very far away. The funny thing was that the guy could not only see them, but also hear and distinguish their speech. That's what it means to enhance all 5 senses. His soul was cleansed, and inside there was an incredible lightness. His eyes became more enlightened, and his mind cleared in just seconds. The deputy said that Qin told him about the appointment. It will come tomorrow, and the fee of 10,000 a month. The girl smiled. At the end, they parted. The elf said she couldn't make it, and would send 2 men. The deputy waved his hand and said, "Let her do as she pleased." The man got into his sports car, and in a second, was already flying down the road at a great speed. Only the light of his headlights illuminated his way in the night. The pixie herself remained in the asylum. The girl looked at everything with genuine interest and groped the walls for a way through. Eventually, one of the walls opened up in front of her, and a passage appeared somewhere far below. The elfess immediately stepped into the darkness. Gao wondered how many secret passages and hiding places it was possible to get lost. Eventually, the woman walked a few more meters and turned the corner and found herself in a strange place that was a factory, but in a completely different place. Gao was shocked to the core. A real factory built underneath the building of all the hospitals. Smart thing they did after all. So this plant's just a decoy, and explosives to kill the move. The guy was sitting in his seat thinking. Suddenly, more voices came to his ears and the elf started talking to someone. The woman encountered some unidentifiable hooded man whose face was hidden from this angle. It was difficult to see who it was at all. Gao squinted. It was hard to even tell if it was a man or a woman. The voice was very indistinct. Only conversation could be heard. He moved a little closer in his imagination and listened even harder. The hooded man stood silent for now and as if preparing himself. But suddenly, Gao literally bounced back as if something threw him back in his head was a real mess. It was an explosion of incomprehensible emotions. Sweat trickled down his face. Gao wondered if the real factory was hidden here, then the magnetic pile should probably be nearby. Having checked his characteristics, the guy was surprised to find that his stamina had increased almost twofold, and all this just at once. This gave him confidence in the future he would need to complete more nightmare missions, then the score would increase even more. The young Pathfinder realized that according to his calculations, the shelter was connected to this pipe, which he had recently crawled through. You could then pass on. There is one problem. Gao hesitated and thought about the Major, who was lying literally a meter away from the dresser, was unconscious. Bending over, Major Gao apologized to her, but this was not the time for gentlemanly antics. Taking the pills out of his pocket, Gao decided to keep them for now just in case, and then he would find his magnetic pile and earn some money. It turned out that Major hadn't been out all this time, but was just pretending, and she was very curious about how this kid knew everything. Eventually, the guy took her in his arms and dragged her into the sewers. Major decided not to show any signs for the time being, but to find out more. To better navigate, Gao decided to apply the map of the underground factory. It was very confusing, but it was better that at least there was something. A chill ran down his spine, and how to navigate all of this, Gao came closer and closer to the intended place, and it was getting a little scary. Looking at the characteristics window, Gao wondered how his mental strength had even managed to drop by 60 units, because he used a lot of magic. But still had to look at the map. At least every dozen seconds, the guy opened the map of the area to see the correct path. From it spilled a bright beam of energy, illuminating the road for the next 10 meters, so it will be better, and at least something will be left to spare. Walking forward along the corridor that seemed endless, Gao continued to carry the Major in his arms, who was carefully pretending to be asleep. There was not much strength left, but Gao continued to drag the girl in his arms, and then he reached the shelter and had to go a little further to the factory. He sat down on the nearest pipe and sat the Major beside him, breathing heavily and trying to regain his strength. The sounds of someone digging and hitting the hard ground with a pickaxe immediately came to my ears, and the work was in full swing. And indeed, somewhere around a few bends, there was a real mine where people worked. There was a lot of equipment, and the miners themselves. Men hit the ground with heavy pickaxes and mined the ore. The work here did not stop for a second, despite the fatigue of the workers. Seeing all this, Gao was very much surprised and scared at the same time. Perhaps the magnetic pile would be somewhere nearby if the mine is here. But to check it is necessary to go to the excavation guy is very excited because the goal was very close. To the only thing left to do is to go there and find out everything. Gao picked up the Major in his arms and began to move forward with a quick leap. He did not light his way. Everything was clear enough as it was. Hiding behind some iron barrier, Gao listened to the magnetic pile was about 15 meters away, but it was dangerous to go there alone. It was decided to wait, for the system still said about 2 o'clock in the morning. Most likely then, he will have a chance. Opening the notification window with surprise, Gao noticed that progress was beginning to increase the assignment, with the Major was playing a key role. Listening even more, the boy heard 2 miners talking. They seemed to be going to rest because they were so tired. An argument began to break out between people. It seemed that someone was slacking off too often, and that was irritating the others. After all, 2 workers went on their own, albeit not entirely legal, rest. The rest just looked at them and gritted their teeth angrily. The 2 men sat down on the stone floor and started smoking a cigarette. One of them complained that he was too tired on this job and wanted to sleep. It was time for action. In a few minutes, the men were already snoring. They didn't even lie down on the floor, but just fell asleep sitting up. This was the chance. Meanwhile, Major kept a close eye on her captor on Gao's body. She sensed spiritual power, or maybe she was just glitching, although no is definitely true. And the situation was complicated by the fact that Gao had taken her capsules, and now Major couldn't do anything. She was literally defenseless for the first time in a long time. All the time, Gao sat in his seat and watched, annoying the girl. Why doesn't he leave? She doesn't even have a chance to do anything. Gao moved closer to Shen and looked at her even more intently, as if he suspected something or just stared at her. But a second later, the unfortunate Major again received a strong blow with a wrench right on the head. The girl cried out in surprise and almost lost consciousness. Above her head, the stars began to swirl again. Acting didn't work, though she tried very hard to play asleep. Such an unexpected turn of events scared Gao very much. He thought that the girl had already gone to the other world long ago. Gao hummed to himself as he carried her on his back. Whether she stays alive or not is not a problem. It's not a big deal. But as soon as the guy thought about it, a system notice appeared in front of him. The girl was a member of the Alliance and will greatly benefit. She needs to survive. Hearing about his new mission welfare, Gao, even a little surprised, and how to even understand it, he seems to need to protect this girl. After thinking about it, the guy still changed his thought. The assignment looked very tempting. You can get more benefits in the future. He decided to think about it after the appointed time had come, and Gao grabbed the girl again and put her on his shoulder. All this time, the workers were hard at work in their mine and did not even notice that a stealthy silhouette crept up to them from behind. Eventually, the two laborers were knocked out by the heavy impact psychic abilities allowed them to see their actions ahead. After changing into the clothes of an ordinary miner, Gao armed himself with a shovel and moved forward. There wasn't much time to speed up if he wanted to get everything done. After walking a few more meters, Gao was surprised to find that in this place, his strength was noticeably weakened. He started digging ore. Although it's just a magnetic pile, it has something of its own, so meditative and calming. But after a second, he started digging with such fury that rocks flew in different directions. The only way to earn money was to dig and dig again. The other workers looked in horror at the strange guy who was digging like a madman in the middle of the night. How is it even possible to work like that? Not paying attention to anyone, Gao was digging, and one of the workers was trying to shout to him by the way he was talking to him. Still, Gao, distracted from his class and greeted his new colleague as kindly as possible, could not be revealed so quickly. Taking up the shovel again, Gao started digging with even more enthusiasm. He replied that he was just taking advantage of the opportunity. That's all there was to it. In the end, the foreman bellowed that we should stop working in the middle of the night and go to bed. 20,000 a month is not so little. Hearing such a fabulous amount of money cheered him up. He had no idea that ordinary miners were paid so much. He must speed up even more. Naturally, instead of going to rest, he started working even faster and even harder, throwing ore in different directions. Gao wiped his sweaty forehead. He had been digging for several hours, but there were no results. Okay, not to worry, but to keep working. Besides, the two miners he knocked out didn't care much if they survived, but if they didn't, it was fate. He sat down on the ground and began to think about what to do tomorrow. He would not be able to get through so easily. Taking up the shovel, Gao made the decision if nothing happened. In the next hour, he would just get the hell out of here. When Gao approached the other workers, one of the miners wondered why he was so early. The guy replied that he was just working at his own pace. With a smile on his face, he added that the early bird always gets the worm, so no wonder he wants to work. Continuing to watch the rest of the miners, the guy pondered what time it was. What are they working so early, and where would he even get the money? With the shovel in the ground, Gao decided to get out of here. It was getting too crowded, and it was time to finish the job. Suddenly, there was a commotion among the workers. One of them saw a small pebble of ore, something they work here day and night for. One of the miners grabbed hold of a shiny rock and started jumping on the spot. He dug up the ore. All the others were also happy for their comrade. But no sooner had he finished his joy than a heavy shovel flew into his face. A resounding sound was heard, and the man immediately lost consciousness. Suddenly, Gao appeared and said in a haughty voice that he had actually dug it up, and that this laborer had just tricked him into doing it. With his shovel pointing forward, he prepared to fight back against any possible attackers who would not dare to take his prey. Suddenly, there was a voice of the brigadier, and everyone fell silent. Gao turned his head in the direction where the voice came from. Everyone else parted ways as the man in the helmet approached the hardest working man, and silence hung everywhere. He jabbed his finger at himself and ordered him to give him this stone and go after his reward of 1,000 gold coins is a bargain. And this was a shame, only 1,000 Gao, because he worked for several hours and more than everyone else, and earned only this pittance. The foreman grabbed the stone and wanted to take it away, but the boy held it tightly, causing a violent reaction. The whole point is that the player saw the notice that this pebble is worth 350 times more than he even want to offer would be foolish to give to this miser. A second later, the foreman received exactly the same powerful blow. Right in the jaw, the man even spit out a few teeth. The other workers stood at their places, with their mouths open in surprise. They did not expect that anyone would dare to go against their bosses in such a way. Now the player knew everything Gao said. He would never give up this stone, because he knows how much it is worth. Now let him choke on it. The terrified worker started to press the panic button, his face turning blue with fear, calling for help. They have a madman here. A second later, a huge horn hanging from a tall tower came to life, and a siren sounded, indicating an alarm at the construction site. The brigadier shouted, pointing at Gao. Whoever caught him first would get the prize. Naturally, all the other workers rushed at the guy with shovels and hammers, each wanting to get a bonus for catching the thief. Gao Yi himself realized that he was one against several, but still continued to fight. He twirled the shovel in his hands and began to scatter the workers. The brigadier gritted his teeth. This kid was so strong he may have been sent by another country to commit sabotage. Who knows? The man was horrified to realize that Gao was running straight at him, waving a huge shovel, and the danger was growing by the second. Eventually, the foreman came to his senses and started tearing his clothes off. He wasn't going to let the thief pass so easily. The man's body was scarred. In the end, he was naked from the waist down, and near the brigadier's body, an obscure dragon began to fly, and he got into a fighting stance and prepared himself. But after a second, his eyes literally flew out of his orbits. It didn't work, and the shovel knocked the man out in a second. It seemed like Gao didn't even feel any resistance. Good dogs should be silent. Everyone else looked on in horror at this strange guy. He is a real monster. The other workers were terrified. Kai was the best of them. He was a good fighter and a skilled craftsman, but he was knocked out with one blow. Then they were all finished. Gao thought to himself that he had already dealt with monsters like Shen and energy warriors, so these were no match for him, even if they didn't try to catch him. In a second, the guy accelerated to a monstrous speed that he couldn't even be seen. Let them try to catch up with him now. Gao was too absorbed and didn't notice that something was already flying at him at a great speed. The guy was still running forward. It was a huge spear that stabbed literally in front of his nose, right into the ground, and made a big hole. Gao, fortunately, managed to bounce aside. There was a huge hole at the point of impact. Apparently someone had launched it with tremendous force. Just how strong this person was. The guy realized that when it comes to energy warriors, he's a total zero, so it's a waste to mess with them now, and started to run away. Another spear island tip flew into him. Gao ran off with all his legs, his speed increasing with every second. A huge wooden spear flew near his neck, just a few centimeters away, but still Gao managed to dodge at the last moment. The man who launched these spears possessed a hooked nose and watched every movement. This kid is really a master. Gao kept running and heard someone's squeaky voice shouting that he couldn't get away with it, but the kid paid no attention. The enemy was like an energy fighter only a few meters away from the life-saving sewer hatch. It was time to leave, and having reached the target point, Gao jumped into the hole in the ground like an experienced swimmer. It was his salvation. But immediately, the expression on his face changed. Gao realized that the bound girl had disappeared somewhere. It seems he had forgotten to knock her out again. Suddenly, a very quiet, ingratiating voice was heard behind me. A girl's silhouette appeared literally out of nowhere. She asked, so Gao returned. A sharp dagger immediately appeared near the guy's neck. And at that moment, Gao realized that he had miscalculated Major, suggested that we play an interesting game. Hearing the guy mumbling something to himself, Major looked at him with an annoyed look at what he even wanted to say that was annoying. A virtual assistant appeared and offered to press a button. If the host didn't do it, he would go to the other side of the world instantly. The choice was obvious, and swinging his fist, Gao hit the big red button that appeared literally out of nowhere. That was just the beginning of the quest. Now the guy will need to destroy this factory and live to fight against the rest of the enemies in the morning. And if he fails the task, he is finished, and literally Gao was in a desperate situation. Enemies literally surrounded him from all sides. Gao was already desperate and seemed to have fallen into madness. He began to recount his biography and how he got the system and became the chosen one. Even in his early childhood, he told everyone that he was special, but no one believed, and everyone thought he was just a crazy kid with fantasies. But now as an adult, Gao cursed the system that had put him in a situation where there was almost no way out. It was a total disaster. All right, though, the guy realized that he's not lacking in beauty after all, and it should help just to take advantage of his strengths. Suddenly, he opened his eyes. His head was visited by a seemingly brilliant idea. Why not start playing by the rules? To use the advice of the assistant said that still his face will hurt, but he will survive, and that's a plus. Hearing such monstrous conditions, Gao was indignant. And why do they not like his face? What is the problem that they are going to beat him? But it was too late to ponder this. Around everything began to rattle, and the ceiling of stone began to crack. Someone was appearing. Finally, the ceiling cracked, and a man wearing large gloves with huge spikes seemed to be an energy warrior. At first glance, the man did not look menacing. He had disheveled hair and a long hooked nose. He asked, "Its accomplice." Shen still managed to get free. Gao was lying on the earth and holding his face. The man asked, "What are they playing here?" He looked very cheerful. Gao was very angry at being hit in the face with a rock. The guy said to get out of here immediately, and don't mess around. Jumping up, he grasped his shovel and prepared to strike. The strange man didn't believe he could do anything at all with this ordinary shovel. But a second later, his face came in contact with the hard metal, and a crunch was heard, but it was broken. The man still remained standing, but was now completely bewildered. Gao hung in the air, holding the handle of the shovel. The guy's eyes almost popped out on his forehead, so easily took the blow with his face. Who this man even is, what his body is made of. The major also thought about it and said aloud that it was not bad. It seemed that this man was stronger than he looked at first glance. Indeed, the man's nose was broken, and blood was dripping from it, and he couldn't believe that some ordinary construction shovel could hurt him so badly. Gao, meanwhile, was already priming himself for the next blow the man was trying to somehow get his head together after the recent event. A second later, the man bit his tongue and his mouth bled, but his hand was heavy after all. The stranger soared into the air from such a blow. He certainly did not expect that some shovel could give him such a blow. And who is this kid anyway? Eventually, the stranger landed on the ground and started cursing everyone. Yes, do they even know who was standing in front of them? The man lost his gloves. Naturally, Gao was not going to listen to all this. He advised him to close his mouth or else go to the other side of the world. The guy was already preparing his shovel. Then the unfortunate man received dozens of blows with shovel and legs. Gao beat him so hard as if he was really going to send him to the other world. The rest of the workers were looking among themselves, and it was foolish to interfere in this quarrel unless you wanted to lose your life. Heavy footsteps were heard. Dozens of people dressed in some strange, unmarked uniforms approaching directly into the mine, seeming to be guards. From somewhere came more people in colorful clothes, each of them different. A man with a bald head ordered everyone to stand in their places. Gao bounced back. Could there really be that many more people hiding in this factory? The guy did not expect these uninvited guests. Looking at them with surprised eyes, the major assumed that it looked like Wang Ju's den of people was a bit small. Looking at this real army, Gao exclaimed, "Is it not enough for her to have a mine full of some strange people?" The man dressed as Roba the criminal was immediately seized by the officers of the law. The criminal cursed everyone and wished them to go to the other world as soon as possible. The major looked at all this, said that because of his behavior, Gao brought her to the factory, so be it will let him live until dawn is generous. Communication here naturally did not catch. The girl tried to call at least to someone, but it did not work. After the cataclysm, the number of satellites was reduced. Turning to Gao, the major said she didn't think she could trust her to watch her back, but there were a few options. Gao wanted to refuse, but immediately received a strong blow to his back and flew a few meters away. He shrank like a scared kitten. He was already in pain after being hit with a rock, and now this girl is beating him up. Still, the criminal managed to free himself and, armed with a glove, moved forward. The man wanted to smear the two men. The major noticed him immediately and turned a wary eye. She had envisioned that option, but not so quickly. Then a powerful blow was heard. The girl did not skimp on her strength and threw him back as far as she could. Gao was watching from the side. The guy blurred like a slug, realizing that he was completely useless and defenseless in this situation. Pointing to the virtual assistant, he said he was choosing normal difficulty. Give him at least one clue on how to get out of here alive. Don't care about the reward. Not that the clue helped. The aide said that Major Shen is not as weak as she seems. You just have to wait and give her time. Everything will have to come her way. At some point, Gao felt that he had enough energy and was ready to fight. He got into a fighting stance and prepared himself. At the end of the quest, promised that his level will increase and the player will be pleasantly surprised by the result. You just have to wait. This was the end of the clue. Gao, in a rage, he grabbed his robot vacuum cleaner instruction manual more, and it is also called a helper. But the robot announced in a joyful voice that since his master had chosen him, he understood everything perfectly, and his smile grew even bigger. But immediately, the unfortunate device was hit. Gao shouted that he didn't understand anything, that it was all lies, and that the system was a total waste. Thinking about it, the player realized that all he had was the attraction of wisdom and a body hardened by physical labor. Gao looked closely and saw that something unusual was happening in front of him, bright lights and metallic objects flying everywhere. The rest of the people who came here just stood there. Baldy told everyone to be careful. They are role models. Their attack is simply mesmerizing. Trying to remain inconspicuous, Gao froze in place. This was impossible to bear for even a second. Beside him stood the major and reminded him that everyone had actually gone to the other side of the world, or he had forgotten. The guy looked at her. Shen looked at him and said with disdain that his holds looked like nothing more than a friendly slap, nothing surprising. Time to use your golem. The monster appeared with incredible speed and immediately rushed to attack the rest of the opponents. The people froze in place. They didn't expect these two to be so strong that it was even such a thing. The only thing left to do was to run to save their lives. The major's combat uniform changed. The girl now looked completely different and took the battle to the next level. Annoyed, she looked at her, so to speak, partner. She asked Gao if he was going to hide behind her back or if he was going to start doing something. Hearing the request for a magical suit and weapons, Major agreed, but he has to tell her how he found out about the magnetic pile and all that. This put Gao in a stupor. He asked how Shen even knew what he was looking for. She was following him or what? And only now he began to realize that Shen seemed to be conscious at the moment when the player was thinking about his plans, sitting in the tunnel. Looking at his opponents, Major said in an irritated voice that he could answer the question no matter what business he had there. Looking at Gao, she took out another pill. The girl said that this tank is in Tang Day's case, since everything is like this. The player slanted his eyes to the side. He hated to admit it, but this girl knew more than she should, and it was only Gao's fault. A second later, he was already in the suit, but no skill improvements followed just for defense, just like the Major said, but it was still impressive. Eventually, the bald man got tired of waiting and jumped up and rushed up to attack, aiming his energy gauntlet at the two men. The fists of this man and the Major came into contact. The earth trembled beneath their feet, and a fierce wind rose around them. They were as strong as each other. But the man smiled. This babe seems to underestimate them. No need to do that in front of her real warrior. His hands began to fill with energy. The criminal pressed harder and harder. His glove began to spark as if overflowing with electricity. Taking a closer look, Gao guessed that it was probably magnesium or some other alloy. The guy stood in his place and just watched. In the meantime, Major felt that the enemy was much stronger than expected. The girl was already struggling to hold his onslaught, which only intensified. And at this moment, Gao finally realized everything is lithium metal to store electricity. The two elements merged into one. Meanwhile, the criminal laughed even harder. His smile grew wider. He said that everyone knows Major can use gold items. Having accumulated enough electricity for himself, the criminal rushed forward. He wanted to see this girl use the electricity defense. Gao finally came to his senses and put his hand forward, saying only one phrase. Shenyi, his voice trembled. Eventually, a mighty blow was heard, and the bald criminal flew off to the side. The man almost fainted from the strain. The poor guy fell to the ground and said only one word. Heart the second, his breathing stopped. The blow was really awesome. The Major put his hand forward and said that everything was ready. The girl needed only one effort to send this man to the other side of the world. Seeing his brother lying on the ground breathless, one of the criminals cried out in surprise and turned white with fear. But immediately, the stranger received his strongest kick right in the jaw. He spit out everything he ate this morning and passed out. In addition to her abilities, the Major also possessed very good physical fitness, and she knocked the man back with a single blow. The people standing behind all this time were shocked. 2 of the 4 were destroyed with just one blow. How was it even possible who they were? Watching everything happening, Gao speculated that perhaps this bald man had sent a false charge of electricity. Strangely looked plausible. Gao stared and didn't notice that another yellow-clothed criminal had appeared behind him and was preparing to attack. After a second, the player felt that a noose was about to snap around his neck. It was a copper trap, and it was not easy to get out of it. The criminal chuckled now that he had caught him, and these two would not go anywhere. Gao was like a dog on a leash, unable to free himself. The perp, meanwhile, was going to stun the poor guy with electricity. This should definitely work their end. Suddenly, some bulldozers standing nearby overflowed with electrical energy and started sending out pulses throughout the space. The electric current literally reached the body of the unfortunate guy in a second and hit him with all its force. Gao screamed in pain, but could do nothing. The criminal cheerfully announced that one was ready on his face. A smile shone on his face. Obviously, the man was proud of himself. The only thing left to do was to finish off this victim, and the criminal swooped down on him armed with a long dagger. Gao stood motionless the entire time. But no. Not even half a second later, the criminal received a powerful blow with a shovel right in the jaw, and his eyes almost popped out. Gao reacted almost instantly. Even despite the electric pulse, he was able to control himself and break out of the fight. It seems that the player himself did not expect that he turned out to be fine after such a thing. But it is even better that the criminal did not realize anything. Looking at his suit with surprise, Gao assumed it was not only gold armor, but there was also some other obscure metal worthy for a major. And only now, the enemy realized that Gao is not afraid of electricity. He has that again. Golden armor. What is it? With a heavy sigh, the player smiled. He said that this man is not the kind of heroes who simply stall for time. Getting closer to his opponent, the guy said that using copper wire is like using fake instead of gold. It won't do anything. In the end, the copper warrior became furious. How dare this guy look down on him? He had already prepared his sword. After such a powerful blow, all that was left of the unfortunate criminal was a bloody stain on the iron golem's huge fist, and that was it. The major looked at her partner ironically. Noting that he might not thank her, she did so purely out of kindness. Almost done. The guy looked around at the more than a dozen fighters lying on the ground. Did she already finish so quickly? Looking at him again, the girl said that these soldiers are unlikely to go anywhere else. And what about Gao himself? Seems to have no account at all. Upon reflection, the player realized that he could never be like this girl. She is just at an unattainable level. For now, let her sort herself out. Shen looked at him and asked what he said about the other 100. I think they were participants in the Call a Friend campaign or something like that. Speaking of the others, the soldiers had already surrounded the huge golem, and there were so many of them that the opponents were not getting smaller. Gao shrank towards the steel giant and tried to find protection there. Basically, it was the only thing he could do. Now, the guy was completely useless. The other participants of the battle were talking amongst themselves. It was the Alliance Major. What was she doing here in a place like this? There were people in costumes everywhere. From somewhere came an older man in the same suit, of course. These people are too young. Too bad. She decided to interfere. The man was approaching. Looking at him, Major smiled. Could it be Mr. Wang himself? What a surprise and a pleasant meeting. The man came closer and grinned in an unpleasant smile. Yes, that's him. And who did she expect to see here? His eyes glistened. Another hooded man appeared. Mr. Wang addressed him, calling him elder, and saying that he had lost too many people in one night himself, see. The voice appeared to be more of a female. Elder said one of the 3 great fighters in the Lost Lands could not stand against superior forces. Hearing that very voice, Gao recognized exactly who it was. He was the mystery man he had heard when he came here. The Major already realized that the fight could not be avoided and prepared herself. These opponents were much stronger than ordinary soldiers. Mr. Wang smiled. Well, the young lady has opened this place, so let her leave this place. The plan is almost ready. Why spill unnecessary blood? But the elder ordered the man to be silent. The old man covered his mouth with his hands and something under his nose. He was visibly very frightened. The Major stood on her steel giant and watched the elder, said that such people are rare, very talented, and strong. Suddenly, a masked man armed with a sharp sword appeared behind the girl's back. If so, let her accept the gift. Shen noticed it in time and turned around. The girl perfectly felt what was going on around her now. In such a situation, her feelings were on the limit. With one deft movement of her hand, she blocked the blade and grasped it with her bare hands, even though she was wearing a protective suit. The invisible assassin looked at the Major with surprised eyes through her mask as to how she even managed to see him in that position. After the strong blow, assassin bounced back. He was sure it was definitely some kind of skill or something. There was no way an ordinary person could have such a reaction. Well, then we'll have to go for quantity. A few more men dressed like that showed up and prepared to attack. Enemies surrounded them from all sides, even tighter. The ring was shrinking. The assassins became more and more numerous, and how to deal with it was a mystery. The player himself realized that these guys in black are very troubled and probably strong, as there are about a dozen of them managed to... But it turned out that there were twice as many of them. They surrounded the steel giant in a ring and came closer and closer, intending to all at once. The Major moved her eyes from side to side and did not know from which side she would be attacked. The girl was ready to take the blow, but there were many enemies. She guided the giant robot attempted to strike, but the man was much faster and began to swiftly leap toward her. Turning to her partner, the girl told him to go back inside, and she would hold them off as soon as she got back and tell the lieutenant there was trouble. Deciding to play the hero, Gao apologized and said that he was not the kind of person to run away from the battlefield. So, no, they would fight shoulder to shoulder. It shocked the girl that Gao seemed completely useless. And when he had a chance to run away, he decided to stay and said he wanted to fight. But it was his responsibility to be on a rescue mission. If he failed, he had no way out. Gao tensed up. Besides, a couple of hours were added to the mission. Now it was necessary to hold out until 10 o'clock in the morning. But how to do it is unclear. Looking at him, Major sighed sadly. Okay, if he wants to fight, let him. But it's a pity he's not an energy fighter, so it would be more difficult. Applying another pill she created literally from nothing, a huge sword the girl swung and prepared to fight back. The player's eyes went up to his forehead. It was an aluminum rod. It was impossible to tell exactly what it was made of, but it looks fascinating. The battle will be interesting. Throwing herself into the attack, Shen shouted one last time that as long as she was alive, the golden armor would protect the guy. But if something went wrong, it was every man for himself. After saying this, she pushed off her steel giant like a gymnast and rushed forward. Her opponents were many and strong. The first roundhouse kick threw several assassins aside at once, and they bounced backwards, leaving the line of attack with incredible speed. The girl swung her spear with a sharp tip in an attempt to reach someone, but so far it was all to no avail. Eventually, she managed to get her hands on one of the attackers and immediately destroy the others, instantly bounced back in terror. The elder, standing to the side, watched everything that was going on and directed she ordered to wear the girl down to lose her strength. The other wards nodded their heads and surrounded the major even more tightly. Shen prepared to fight back and gripped her spear tighter. Problems appeared one after another. Shen gritted her teeth and prepared for the battle. It promises to be very difficult. It seems they are gaining experience. All the others who stood aside watched in horror as several experienced fighters could not handle one girl as strong as she was. Several assassins already lay on the ground. Breathless, they had been defeated by the marks of the Spear Island blows. After such a thing, no one would have survived. The rest of the survivors only tightly gathered around the girl and prepared to attack her. Major realized that the situation was critical. All this while holding onto the shovel, Gao stood beside the steel giant assassins. All this time, he was ignored. All this time, Major's main target came out. The elder also understood that Major was exhausted, and that kid who always stands aside didn't even start to move. But why? The player pondered theoretically. After overcoming the first barrier, he could become an energy fighter, but the information was too little to conclude. The virtual assistant appeared again and shook his head. He said it was all wrong. The guy wasn't ready for this yet. Already exhausted, Gao shook his head. No, he's going to start setting his own terms again and saying that everyone is in danger. Although stoic Gao thought about it and prepared himself, the system talks about the conditions, but not naming what actually needs to be done is definitely not for him. Except, if those conditions were unrelated to the assignment he'd gotten, Gao took a closer look at the notification panel. Major was already very tired and leaning on her long rod. The girl fought hard, but the opponents as if they were not going to retreat. The elder realized that this fighter was weakened and ordered the others to attack together and rushed into battle. At this rate, they would be able to defeat her. From the back, on the major already moved several attackers. Girl so far stood in his place and could not even move from fatigue. Suddenly she lifted her head up and sighed heavily. She gritted her teeth and prepared for a last-ditch effort to save her life. Pushing off the ground, the major flew upward, scattering all the other assassins moved in pursuit of her. The girl spun in her seat and began to scatter all the others while fending off attacks, despite the fact that her strength was running low. Suddenly, an elder began to attack her from behind. She caught the moment when the enemy was distracted by the other fighters and took advantage. Then came the strongest blow. Even on the girl's back, there was a palm print. Even though she was wearing armor, she still received a strong blow. All the while, Gao was standing on the ground and saw Major flying towards him. The girl had probably been hit by someone and couldn't even control her movements. Zhao gritted his teeth and braced himself. He knew the Major would fly right into him, and he'd be lucky if they both survived. The guy put out his hands, and still he managed to catch his comrade. Shen cried out that she was hurt, but there was no choice better than to crash. In the end, Gao was lucky to be alive. Although he was breathing hard, he cushioned the fall with his body and hoped that the girl survived. The Major lay a few feet away from him and didn't seem to be giving any signs of life. Gao leaned over and asked if everything was all right, hoping it was all right. The elder rose into the air and jumped up to the others, gesturing for her charges to continue attacking. She ordered Old Man Wang to deal with them. The rest, she would finish the rest herself. The man bowed and accordingly nodded. He ordered all his underlings to bring these two in immediately. It would be necessary to deal with them before the fighters came to their senses. The situation was critical. Player thought with all his might. Happened everything that happened in the past. Energy dissipated by great pressure. But suddenly a thought came into his head. The guy tried to calm down. He started to guess what it was all about. Maybe it would help them. Zhao realized what kind of mediator he was and looked at the pile of ore that the workers had carelessly left behind without even noticing it. He took a small pebble in his hand. Although energy fighters extract energy from ore, it is different from the material of the elements. If energy is transformed into material, it may be possible to purify it from impurities. In my hands, some object began to materialize. Well, he finally figured it out. Of course, magnetism. A brilliant idea comes as always at the very last moment, only to be done. Meanwhile, Golem still remained on the move and continued to defend his masters from the attackers. He stood up for the two humans. Luckily, Major quickly came to her senses. Gao noticed this and asked, "Is she still in? Or has she run out of steam? Now it's time to act." In the end, the guy got mad. She said, "You can't go." So, what's the problem? Don't let him argue. Looking at the exhausted Major, the guy asked, could she not even stand? Shen replied that she was a soldier, and soldiers always stay. Then he decided to ask again if energy warriors could use magnetism. Shen wondered, so why would he actually need it? The guy didn't answer the question and said he would cover in Major, let him help find the location of the magnetic ore, and then everything will work out. Standing behind his back, Shen couldn't believe it and couldn't understand what was wrong, but agreed and said she would try. Bouncing off the ground, Gao flew straight at the attackers. No need to worry, he is also strong and can resist. The people shouted in surprise that he was fed up with life. They'd wipe him out, but the girl should be kept alive. She'd still be useful. Realizing that time was short, the major rushed out of her seat to look for magnetic ore anywhere. Meanwhile, the battle continued. The steel giant was destroying one person after another. Gao was still carrying his shovel and trying to fight back. Watching everything from the side was Chief Wang. The man was getting angrier and angrier with every second. His face was beginning to curve. How pathetic they are, after all. The old man couldn't stand it. They can't handle a whole crowd with one boy, so they let the girl go. Suddenly, something flew very fast through the air above the others. People raised their heads and looked up. Right in front of them. There was a rumbling sound. Continuing to stomp on one of the attackers, the guy asked if she had any luck finding the ore. Major nodded her head. Everything is there. With a smile on her face and hope, Shen ordered to find the location of the concentration of magnetic energy. Within an hour, this space could disappear. It would be good if Gao himself understood what a place of magnetic energy concentration meant. He hadn't been told about it before. The old man realized that this girl could destroy this mine with her efforts and ordered everyone else to stop her at all costs. Meanwhile, the elder stood back and watched. She didn't believe it was even possible another man in a hoodie had appeared behind her back. The old man went into a rage. He screamed with anger. These two don't realize what they've done to destroy this place. It's a crime. The major smiled and thanked her partner. It seemed they made a good team after all. Gao didn't understand anything and just grabbed his throat. Tears came out of his eyes. The guy realized that the major had gotten it all wrong. The poor guy was ready to tear his hair out. He asked to find the location of the magnetic ore, not destroy it. What's the problem? And that's his own psychic. That girl will confuse right and left, and he's asking her for things like that. Wang was furious. He had no plans here to stay and give his life. The old man ordered everyone else to deal with the two and run away. Suddenly, a silhouette floated into the air. It was an elder dressed in a hoodie, and the others all raised their heads in surprise and prepared themselves. The woman thrust her arm forward and blocked the steel giant's blow, leaving a dent in his huge palm. She realized that these people were no use to her. She had to make it on her own, or they'd all be here for life. But naturally, Major was not going to let go. Her just like that. The girl prepared her fist. How presumptuous is it to just attack her like that? There was a rumble, and a column of dust rose into the air. Everyone stopped for a second and began to look around, hoping for a brief respite. Something was wrong, Gao asked. What's wrong? The frightened girl. Major replied that the magnetic field was about to explode, and then it would be the end of everyone. Suddenly, the faces of the people were illuminated by a bright light. All opened their mouths and looked at what was happening with surprised eyes. The brightness of this brightness could make Gao blind, and he covered his face so that his eyes wouldn't burn. It was the first time he had seen something like this magnetic field. Even if you use the eye of deprivation and spiritual guidance, it may seem that the very essence of this world you understand. The guy felt differently. You exist, and at the same time you don't, as if the universe itself. He found himself in some strange place, completely different from the world. I had an idea. Yigao went ahead. Major shouted after him what he was going to do. Magnetic field will explode. We have to run away from here into ore, not turn into ore. The girl didn't notice how her opponent approached her from behind and was about to strike. She was too distracted to do so. But at some point she saw it and blocked the blow. The elder was now fighting the major at full strength. All right, if she wants to fight, let it be so. Around the girl appeared a protective dome. Elder did not expect such a quick reaction and bounced back. The woman covered herself with her hand to hide her face. All these efforts were just useless. The end was predetermined. The major was already completely exhausted and just kneeling on her knees. The girl was coughing up blood, and the elder was saying that soon a new star would be born here. Her face changed, as if her mind had left this woman. She said this place would be your grave, forever. Naturally, Major did not want to believe it. The girl wiped the blood from her face and prepared to attack again, even at the cost of her life. Suddenly heard Gao Gai's voice. Already preparing to attack, the elder distracted from the major and raised his head up. There was something going on. The woman looked up and saw Gao standing on a dais, holding a huge energy sphere in his hands, about to launch it. Everyone else also held their breath. People didn't understand what this kid was going to do air cannon, or how to understand it. Suddenly, they were grabbed by some air tentacles and lifted up. People could not do anything and just dangled helplessly. It finally worked out. Gao was very satisfied. Now his energy potential matched his unrivaled energy source. And then the magnetic field exploded. It was so strong, the elder was the first to be hit, and her body began to disintegrate. The entire building of the mental hospital under which this magnetic ore mine was located blew up in a second. There was a rumble, and eventually when it was over, Major was lying on the ground, face down and barely breathing. The girl was barely alive. A few meters away, Gao appeared around only ruins. Guy was very frightened. Did he make a mistake and hit the Major? It is unacceptable. The guy himself did not realize what happened. At that moment, he just wanted to make an air cannon, but somehow got a bomb that exploded. He pondered about it for a few more seconds, but suddenly Gao was interrupted by someone's voice and asked, could this guy really use oxide energy? From somewhere appeared a vague silhouette of a girl. She was somewhere in armor and had her hands ready to defend herself. From afar, she looked like a real angel. Behind her back were two large wings. The girl repeated the question as she did so. Seeing such a beautiful sight, Gao was stunned for a second and opened his eyes even wider. They're beings who fell from heaven after the apocalypse. They call themselves the messengers of heaven or something. They appeared at the dawn of life, conquering most of the earth and causing people to worship them as gods. What a surprise. Another good opportunity to shoot was not to be missed, and the warrior began preparing his cannon again to hit the angels. The sphere began to fill with energy again, attracting all living things directly to itself. People soared into the air along with the angel himself. After the explosion, there was a huge crater even bigger than the last time the angel was floating in the sky, and watched everything from the side with some caution. The guy felt that these shots had completely drained him of energy. There wasn't much left. However, the spiritual strength only became greater. In the end, he became so enthusiastic that he thought he was all-powerful, since he could use such a powerful aura and weapon. For starters, he would like to try it out on some stronger angel. Noticed this and got ready. The girl covered herself with her hands in an attempt to defend herself. But instead of attacking to everyone's surprise, Gao began to exercise to regain his excellent physical condition. Finishing his performance, Gao said that he only wanted a quiet existence in the unknown, but he was left with no choice. Now he's forced to be honest. He's a super energy fighter, better than all the others put together. The guy kept waving his arms around. In the end, the very people who attacked them also woke up. Old Wang raised an eyebrow in surprise. What does this mean? Super energy fighter. Angel also thought it was bullshit. The woman was getting more and more furious that this guy thinks he's a god. Her name was Mushifa, and the angel vowed that she would destroy his super fighter. The girl swung her arms and prepared to deliver her strongest blow. But Gao said he was not at all bluffing and was telling the truth, and prepared his punch as well. Using magnetic energy, he pulled out several dozen metal rods from the ground and pointed it directly at Angel. It had no effect, and Mushifa just cut them with her hand. The girl was incredibly strong, and it wouldn't hurt her. It was just a deceptive maneuver, and the kid was preparing his most powerful attack by accumulating all the magnetic power he had. Creating a large sphere, he aimed it directly at the enemy. Let him try to block it if he can. Finally, the angel felt an incredible pressure, even her almighty power couldn't compete with, that the girl shrieked. Breathing heavily, Gao thought that he had succeeded in destroying her. In front of him was a huge vortex of wind and magnetic energy that he had created with his hands, and now this thing was sucking everything. Angel still remained alive, but realized that the magnetic factory and the ore was gone, along with everything that was there. This time the Celestial realized there was no way to defeat this guy, but the girl vowed to destroy him some other time and headed for the exit. Gao only gave her a middle finger and shouted back that if she was sure of it, then let her fight him for 300 rounds instead of just talking. But at some point, it seemed to him that the power he possessed was too powerful for him to control. There was a strong wind around, and the tornado began to suck his creator inside. Gao could no longer stand on his feet and slowly moved there. He tried to cling to the ground to somehow stay in place, but it was no use. The tornado was getting worse. Goosebumps ran down his spine when Gao realized what he had done with his hands. The guy had created a black hole that was now approaching him. Grabbed the nearest rebar to keep himself on the ground, or he'd get there, and God knows what would happen to him. The black hole was coming closer and closer. The tornado grew more powerful and sucked everything living and non-living inside. Gao was just trying to hold on. In the end, the iron stick could not withstand the powerful explosion and flew out of the ground. Continuing to hold on to it, Gao flew into the air. In the end, after flying a few meters, the guy felt that he hit his cheek into something very warm and soft, but he didn't understand what it was. The Major was lying next to her, and it wasn't hard to guess that Gao had flown face first into her ass. The girl still seemed to be unconscious. Coming to his senses, the guy jumped up to her and started begging her to wake up, needing her super skill to get out of this situation. But realizing that the Major would remain unconscious, Gao gave up trying to wake her up. The system made sure she didn't wake up. Eventually, the black hole began to grow so that the energy filled the entire space around Gao, covered himself with his hands to avoid being blinded. But a second later, suddenly, this powerful flash dissipated and only the acrid smell of iron hung in the air. In front of him now, the guy saw some liquid substance that looked like mercury or some other liquid metal. At some point, Gao heard someone's very familiar laughing voice, reminded him of something on the guy couldn't figure out what. Suddenly the substance stirred and began to move like a living person, turning into a strange, shiny silhouette. Gao stopped for a second. It didn't take more than a few seconds for the guy to see his exact copy in front of him, which was getting better by the second. In the end, Gao stood before him himself, only made of some kind of metal. This is a new form of intelligent life, but how is this possible? For a few more seconds, he and his cops stood opposite each other, unable to figure out what to do next. His mind began to whirl with thoughts. Gao thought that this thing appeared because of the concentration of magnetic ore, and a black hole was quite possible. So far, he seemed benevolent. The clone just stood there, examining his new body with incomprehension and surprise. No sooner had Gao finished his thought than suddenly the clone started moving towards him incredibly fast, and his body melted into liquid. Suddenly, a black cat appeared from somewhere, and with a hiss and a meow, he rushed straight at the strange creature with his fangs out. The wild cat clung to the creature's hand and began to hold it with his teeth. Clone looked at him in surprise. It was a black wildcat that Gao had seen recently in the asylum and in the cave itself that had been following him all this time. Meanwhile, the cat began pouncing on the creature made of metal, clawing with its sharp claws as the clone tried to defend itself. Eventually, the cat managed to separate the arm to exist his body, and it fell to the ground. With a clatter, the cat only purred. As suddenly, the wild creature, to everyone's surprise, clamped its teeth into the strange substance and began to devour it. Seeing such a strange sight, Gao was horrified that this cat was even thinking about why it was eating this nasty stuff. It was unclear what would happen next. The guy looked at the strange cat, who was just sitting on the ground and had already finished devouring the metal arm, breathing heavily. The cat just paced from side to side and looked at the new world with a studying gaze. She seemed to be fine for now. Gao took a closer look. Cat probably got poisoned when he ate that metal, but he can't tell anyone about it. They'd think he was crazy. Suddenly the cat changed color and was now bright white, and he was walking on two legs. That's the power of survival. The next second, with incredible speed, the cat looked at the guy with its bright blue eyes and stopped. Then he rushed on two paws straight towards the guy wanting to attack him. He didn't look as friendly as before. Moreover, this animal was holding a rather weighty stone in its hands and was preparing to attack. Gao covered himself with his hand to protect himself. The guy had already completely stopped realizing what was going on. The cat jumped up and screamed all he could do was let it use his guise. In the end, after a strong blow, Gao lay down in a blackout, and the cat, on two paws, had calmly went about its business. This lesson is over. All that was left to report to Gao was that he was attacked by a talking upright cat. Right now, he was left lying on the ground, passed out. The virtual assistant didn't take long for the owner to get the chest, and many rewards. He has completed the task after all. Although it seems that the guy was not thinking about that at all, he was just lying down because of fatigue and couldn't even move a finger normal. But the assistant was not going to fall behind his master so easily, and used a powerful medicine to revive the unfortunate man. Realizing that it was all useless, the robot began shouting that it had received notification of a new explosion that would take place in just a few seconds. Unhappy Gao cursed everyone around him for why he had suffered so much that he deserved this hell. Though eventually, he woke up feeling like he'd been beaten by a wildcat and then passed out, though that was more likely true. By the way, where's the actual code player began to move his head in different directions in search of an annoying animal, but he and a trace of it is gone. Turning his head once again, Gao saw the major girl lying leaning on a rock and was still unconscious. This time, there are two drugs in addition to pills. It's time to bring the girl back to life. Otherwise, she will go to the other side of the world. With two trembling fingers, Gao presented a small pill directly to her mouth. If she died here, all medicinal actions would be useless. The capsule is large. Gao heard somewhere that people who are unconscious should not be given medicine or they will suffocate. Can mouth-to-mouth breathing do? Overcoming the fear and disgust, Gao moved over. Okay, human life is paramount, and there is no need to hesitate now if he wants to save her. The girl's lips were very thin and hardly pink, and suddenly they began to move at the most inopportune moment. Major came to her senses. And the first thing the girl saw was Gao reaching out to her as if to kiss her, and she was immediately furious at what this impudent man was doing. Realizing the situation he was in, Gao decided to play dumb and just waved hello, hoping the girl wouldn't notice. But no, It was a failure, and again, he received a strong blow with his fist right in the stomach. His eyes rolled back again, and he felt as if he'd been hit with a sledgehammer and almost passed out on the spot. He lay like that for a short time and came to his senses relatively quickly. The major was already waiting for him, and she asked him unhappily. Gao shook his head and muttered to himself that he had actually brought her here in his arms and given her medicine, so she owed him a favor. Deciding to stop all this, Major pointed at the mess nearby and asked the guy whose handiwork it was. She didn't remember anything. Gao proudly said that of course he was the one who had scattered these people like puppets. She didn't believe him, but the major did. After Gao, from surprise for a second, quieted, the girl continued. He is a handsome man, so he is probably strong too, so it sounds true. They shook hands. Gao had somehow lost all his fervor and was now very shy and ready to blush right now. As suddenly they were interrupted, the rumble of a motorcycle was heard distinctly. Someone stopped just a few meters away from them. It was one of the servicemen. He was sitting on a huge futuristic bike. Next to him stood the same man, inviting him to sit down. The major didn't have to beg for long. The girl jumped on the motorcycle. The military man wanted to say something, but she interrupted him and said she knew everything. Then Major looked at Gao and asked, "Is he there going to go with her, or will he stay here?" The guy immediately agreed. Seated on the back of the motorcycle, Gao unceremoniously took the girl by the waist. Then over the shock of the young soldier, he did not expect such audacity. Before he could say a word, the motorcycle and the major were off the road and roared forward, turning into a dot in the distance. They flew at a great speed with the wind whistling in their ears. Gao wondered if he had done well. The guild should have given him some kind of reward. Major inquired, "Does he really need this reward? There are things more valuable than money if he's going to move on." Shen smiled. "And what's wrong with the university? What's so bad about it? You study, you get grades, you get universal recognition, and you serve the people." Looking at her, Gao squinted at what she was implying that she wanted to say to him, but that was the end of the conversation. Major only pressed harder on the gas. The events moved to 9 o'clock in the morning. At the high school athletic field was buzzing with activity. There were many students and voices were heard. The teenagers were looking amongst themselves. What's the matter? Why they were gathered? They are going to explain the principles of entrance exams to them at all or not. In front of them sat several people dressed in expensive suits. They were high-ranking officials and company executives. Then the students directly came out. The principal, third deputy principal, and Lieutenant Chin principal asked for silence in a polite voice. Seeing that this had no effect, the lieutenant snatched the microphone from the hands of the surprise director and began to speak himself. The man didn't choose his expression. He told it like it is and thinks that in front of him stand only a bunch of scum who can't think with their heads. The lieutenant was getting really angry, as if he thought he was once again yelling at his underlings instead of the regular students. The faces of the students began to change, and they definitely didn't like being called trash or anything like that, and a disgruntled whisper began to creep in. And the lieutenant went on as if nothing had happened. He accused the principal of covering up for student offenders, even though they were delinquent. Tandy, the third deputy, was the school principal, and at the same time, a member of the Board of Education. This person is quite important. When the students heard that their current principal had been fired, they immediately went into horror. This man was the best thing to happen in the last few years. The old man himself realized that the students were unlikely to be satisfied, but there was nothing he could do. And the soldier continued to shout. He said that the Alliance would send a check to the Forgotten Lands so that they could thoroughly search the place and find the intruders. The man was so angry he almost lost his mind. He wanted to invite the new principal, but the head of the student council interrupted him. A boy with long purple hair and big glasses came up from among the crowd and apologized in a serious voice and said he would like to ask a question. The president of the student council did not think for a long time and asked on what grounds the director was dismissed at such a fast rate and what he was actually guilty of. As if the lieutenant had been waiting for this question, he cracked his knuckles and said that since it was a matter of course, he would explain everything in detail. The man moved to the microphone and bellowed that the principal was covering for the student suspects in the crime-mentioned student Gao Neng's name. Besides, the man was yelling about how their major was completely attempted. Shen, the youngest major in the entire academy, this would be a major loss. The students began to chatter. They hadn't even heard who Major Shen was and what a high-energy fighter. Hearing that this man had been eliminated, the student council president lowered his head and sat back down in his seat. No more questions were asked. The girls began to whimper when they heard such heartbreaking news. His story is not over yet, and for sure, they at least hoped. Another teacher came on stage and wanted to continue. He had to tell the students about the upcoming exams and had already opened his mouth. As suddenly, there was a terrible roar of the engine, and a huge motorcycle at an incredible speed literally flew through the air above the students. It stopped, and the tires squealed. Two riders sat on it, and their faces were hidden by helmets. No one knew who was in front of them. A familiar voice was heard. One of the riders started to take off his helmet and said in surprise, "They have a meeting here. It seems he arrived on time." When the others saw who was hiding under the helmet, they shrieked with delight, and the girls almost fainted from surprise. The director smiled. The colonel almost bit off his tongue in surprise, and the third deputy was furious. In front of them stood Gao, alive and well, the guy they had just talked about, and ironically asked him if he should get a chair. Zhang ran up to Gao and started asking why he was here. Gao scratched the back of his head and said shyly that he was actually a student in class. Waving to the others, the boy smiled. He said he had done well on the mission and hoped the school would accept those honors. Hearing Major Shen's name, everyone else was shocked. The deputy shrieked in surprise, and the lieutenant didn't even know what to say. The girl took off her helmet. Indeed, it was she herself, and confirmed the words of her colleague. Her bright eyes stared out at the crowd. A ringing voice rang out suddenly. She said that on behalf of the military department, affirms the merits of this man. The students who had just been told that Gao had tragically gone to the other world were puzzled to see him standing before them alive and well. The third deputy was furious. He didn't understand, because he had seen with his own eyes how this guy had been destroyed. The lieutenant was also confused. But Teacher Zhang was wondering if Major was alive, and he was here what Gao was doing last night. There was a smile and bewilderment on the man's face. Sighing heavily, the guy averted his eyes and said that it was nothing special, just helped the army with a little business, and killed almost 200 people. He specifically spoke disparagingly about it and smiled at the end, saying that there was nothing to talk about. After these words, the girls in the crowd were really speechless. They were convinced of the awesomeness of this energy fighter. Yes, and besides, he is handsome. He's the best student in his third year of high school, and he's not only an honor student, he's also handsome. Major came up behind Gao and smiled and said that he would get extra points and a reward for destroying the underground factory. The girl smiled and looked at the principal and suggested that we have an award ceremony, since this was the case, and everyone was gathered right here. The director, who is about to be deprived of his position, has forgotten how to breathe. Can he still make decisions here? In the end, the lieutenant couldn't stand it any longer and screamed the man was no longer in control of himself. He said that even if the major outranks him, she can't make such decisions bypassing the army. How dare she even do such a thing? After all, he himself commanded this mission, and the director was removed from his post. Also, Lieutenant Man wanted to say something, but stammered. Shen looked at him and smiled. Is it really about the emergency committee? Her voice sounded as if she was mocking. That's right. The lieutenant showed the flash drive with the permit. He said he had official government authorization. This conversation is over. But suddenly, another junior lieutenant appeared and read out a document. A whole month of summer, the Forgotten Lands Division is coming under Shen's jurisdiction. The man showed a forfeiture of the rank of Lieutenant Qin, signed by a higher authority at the federal consulate. Then the man was stunned inside, as if everything he had been building for years had collapsed in an instant. The major walked a few steps and said that Qin no longer had a military rank. The man didn't want to give up so easily, and as if he was pushing her. There was no choice. Now the ex-military man didn't know where to go. All he did was for the country, for the alliance. How could he be deprived like this? Why do they have to do all this? The man squeezed the microphone in his hands until it cracked and almost broke it. He couldn't control his emotions anymore. The major folded her arms across her chest and said in a serious voice that you understand his good intentions, but he hadn't thought about the people from the Forgotten Lands. And here was the true face of this man. He smiled and barked about this garbage, even to think of shame. What other interests? They are greedy and deserve only one capital punishment, the man said it with all certainty. All these people are parasitic on the alliance. Lieutenant seems to have forgotten that students from the Forgotten Lands are listening to him and drawing conclusions. He called them the most obscene words. The man had already completely lost his sense of tact and spoke as if a silhouette had appeared behind his back at home.